Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Terminus, the blast beats of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka intimidating a relapse record executive to give you a deal in 1992 by sucking your own dick in the conference room.
Dang. It's, I feel like Relapse would be impressed.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been keeping the sucking your own dick ones for every year end so far. It's become a tradition.
And I am the black metal guy, aka dreaming your own MK Ultra trigger.
God, been there. I hate it when I'm activated as a sleeper cell by my subconscious. I only want my handler to do that. So, boys and girls, here we are at the end of the third season of Terminus. 2.5 years we've been doing this now. And what a year it's been. It's been a tumultuous one for both of your hosts. Just a lot of work, a lot of personal upheaval, etc. But we are out the other side, probably headed toward greener pastures in 2023. Anybody who's listening to the year-end episode already knows the deal. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and support us on Patreon. But I just want to get past all that housekeeping and just start talking about the year. This has been an interesting one. Definitely difficult to keep the show going sometimes with our scheduling issues for both of us, but yeah. We somehow managed to. We promise it's going to be better in 2023, guys. Well, we got a lot of shit done.
I think we've already picked up I think we've already picked it up. I feel like the last couple months have been tight.
Yeah, we've been getting better on it.
We've had some, the last few weeks we've had erratic scheduling, but we've got, I feel like we've done, I'm quite proud of the content we've done in the last few months, and I think we've done it we're back to doing it consistently.
Oh yeah, no, I think the episodes this year were really good, and I think they're only going to get better next year, but
the summer was long, and it was rough.
That summer, man.
It started very early. It continued very late, and we appreciate. Some of you may have found it frustrating. We appreciate your sticking around.
Yeah, thanks to all of our supporters and all the new listeners that we've gotten over the course of this year, and. Yeah, we got a lot of plans for 2023, but just so everybody knows, if you weren't familiar with our tradition, this is going to be our last regular episode of the year, and we'll be taking our winter break at the beginning of January, so you can expect us, we'll get the exact date set at one point, but mid to late January, we're going to be back with Season 4. It's going to be our third full calendar year of doing the podcast, so that's going to be... Did you expect it to go on this long, man?
Yeah, because when we started it, I was like, well, we either do this or we don't do it.
Yeah, we're doomed.
Like a little known, I mean, I think I expected, my goal was, let's do it at least 5 years. Mm-hmm. And if after that point it turned out to be a thankless task or, whatever, we were both promoted to Viceroy of the East India Company. Right? We might have to reevaluate it. But the goal was, do it as a serious thing. And a funny trivia that some of our patrons know, but maybe people don't know is. We don't talk about it a lot, but we did, in fact, record a few 2 or 3 proto-Terminus episodes in 2019, and was shelved because work and because we just hadn't got the formula right and shit. And so I think when we came back to it, it was like, we got to hit this hard.
Yeah, no, I think I expected it to last a while, but I guess what I'm most surprised by is how regular a part of life it's become doing the show. It's like, when we're in the trenches during the summer and stuff, we're in agony, just being like, Jesus Christ, why do we do this to ourselves? And then we have a 2-week break, and then we're like, oh, I feel weird not talking about obscure black metal tapes this week, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And when it's working, this year we had like a hell period, but normally like when it's working, even if it's an annoying obligation and you've got to like juggle it with other things, it always makes shit better. Like when I mean, my big run of work for the year really only just ended a couple weeks ago, and it was, motivation was tough near the end, and it was only really when I decided to lock back into Terminus and like, okay, we're just going to put out some damn good episodes, that it made it easier for me to do the other shit too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I feel you. It's doing Terminus sometimes is kind of like going to the gym. It's like it's
exactly.
It's agonizing to get there, but once you're there, it's okay.
What I found was that I can only, at some points this year, it was crucial for me to just be not doing Terminus or deprioritizing it, but you could only do it so long. Just like you can only skip exercising for so long before it backfires.
I know what you mean.
At first you're saving time, and then you are just losing life.
Terminus is love. Terminus is life.
That's right.
So, year-end episode. Before we get to the list, we'll chat a little bit because you.
Our message of love to share with the global metal community.
What was you sneezing or trying not to sneeze or something?
No, I was just laughing at you saying Terminus is love, Terminus is love. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so to kind of start off, just talking a little bit, you wanted to talk about last year's list in conjunction with this one, which I guess we kind of do every year. We kind of go back and reevaluate last year's picks, but I know that you had some thoughts about that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I feel like it'd be good to do it at the beginning of the show, because otherwise it becomes an afterthought. So, the thing about these lists, I feel, although ranking things is important to me, I find the list exercise always a bit tough, because I feel like I often haven't had enough. We do so rapid fire through the whole year, and when I have free time, I think we both end up listening to old shit or whatever, right? Or just stuff that's not metal. And so it can feel like you don't have time to adequately weigh what was really important, and it's always interesting to come back to it the next year and be like, well, what would I do? So last year at the end, we both agreed that Skepticism's Companion was phenomenal, and could have been my number one. I said that at the time. Funeral Mist dropped Deiform by surprise right around the end of the year. And I thought, hey, this is fucking great. This is a true down-the-line black metal album. Every song is distinct. It's blistering. It sounds it sounds much more like Hate Forest and the most extreme pagan black metal stuff. It's shows a different side to Mortuous's work, and sounds, although it's very true, it sounds very futuristic. I think that was the thing I liked about it, the sort of cold militaristic edge, right? And, I listened to that album a lot around then. I haven't gone back to it a ton. I would still probably put it top 5, if not top 3, for last year. But I feel like, and if I just wanted to be a bandwagoner and just imitate the cool death metal guy, I would put Skepticism as number 1. However, I think, in retrospect, I should have just put Ruins of Beverest as number 1. We both left them off the list because it was just such a known quantity. It's like, yeah, okay, right, Alexander von Meilenwald's going to put out another work of genius, and, there it goes. Okay, cool, it's a Ruins of Beverest record. And in some sense, it was his most laid back and rockish one. I remember we both talked about that. It was a little more immediately accessible, more like a Fields of the Nephilim thing. And so maybe it made me think at the time, well, this is just like less... It's not sort of swinging for the bleachers like the other ones. But it actually was. And I've listened to it And I've just spent the last year thinking more and more about Ruins of Everest, and probably in part because of that album, and it's become a go-to listen for me. Although Ruins of Everest is highly atmospheric, it's not always music you can just throw on to chill, right? Or throw on when you're working or doing stuff. And it can be emotionally consuming, right? Or sort of strange. And this one is just highly listenable in a way that I think it's good, in a way that resembles his non-metal influences, like Nephilim or Dead Can Dance or whatever. And I think that's always something part of what he's aspired to. You get a lot of that Soil of the Incestuous vibe on this one. So I think it's really good, and the thing that I came to appreciate more and more, very audible lyrics. The lyrics are awesome.
Oh, yeah.
The lyrics are always a highlight, but I think that, and on Exuvia, they were like poetry. On this one, it's more like, it's poetic, but it's more like a weird fiction or future fantasy short story or condensed novel that he's written. And it's about a mystic quest for Thule, right? But he's bringing in all of this, both the classic pagan lore of black metal and also all this sort of esoteric mythos about Hyperborea and the sort of the notions of Agartha and the subterranean world. And some of the images, like, you just get this image of, like, a cromlech ringing like a bell in the steppe. Like ringing like a giant megalithic structure ringing like a bell, or adventurers submerging underground. It's all of his works are just, they never just have a theme or a thing they're expounding. They always have this complete imaginative transformation and fusion of his influences, and in this one it just came out as this sort of strange, forward-looking fantasy, and I think it's very cool, and it's so weird that it's on Nuclear Blast.
I really like that record. I'm still comfortable with not having featured it, just because, at least for me, I don't think it's like, it doesn't crack into the top of his discography for me. My big thing is like Rain Upon the Impure through like Blood Vaults era. And I think like it's obviously excellent, it's obviously genius, but it's not one that I've gone back to, and also the fact that it's so based around kind of goth rock ideas just puts it further outside of my regular listening by default. I think for me it's like there's a very fair case to be made that everything Ruins does is better than everything else. Sort of like the argument I made about skepticism, that this is just like, it's just high art that's, it's unfair to pit it against anything else. I think you could definitely make that argument, but that's interesting.
It's like we said the same thing about Ruins and Skepticism, but they ended up in opposite places of our lists, right? Skepticism, like, top 2, Ruins just off. And I realized in retrospect, like, why did I do that?
Oh, for me, it's just...
I totally get... I totally get why it wasn't on the list for you. I don't think that was, like, a mistake on your part or anything. I just think for my list, I would put it at number 1. And it's just... And like, I get why the goth rock thing makes it not part of your regular rotation. I think I didn't expect it to be part of my regular rotation, but in part because of the goth rock thing, it became part of my regular rotation.
I can see what you mean. Go ahead.
But I agree with you that, like, it's got to be Rain Upon the Impure or Foulest Seaman for his best ones. And for his, like, weirdest, most difficult one, probably Exuvia.
Yeah, I think that in terms of, like, just more broadly talking about the list, looking back on my list from last year, I guess the thing that's interesting is that I basically stand by the ordering of my list, but what I found was the stuff that was quote unquote lower on the list, like up toward 20, I actually ended up listening to those records more than a lot of the stuff in the top 10. And I think that, I mean, I guess it's not really an error to rate things in this way, but I think last year maybe I swung a little too far on the pendulum of like trying to, you know, really promote outside the box, sort of like difficult records to some degree. And I ended up losing out, you know, giving fairer representation to stuff that I listened to more. So I think I've corrected that a little bit.
What would
this
be
year.
an example of that from your list? I'm looking at the lists right now.
Oh, like for instance, the Eisenhand record, I listened to that probably, you know, only slightly less than the Skepticism record. Or, you know, or the Passeism record. And it's all the way up at 12. That probably should have been closer to number 1, because it was pretty high up there for you. I listened to that a ton. I still listen to that album. That or the Fluids record, which I really liked and I still listen to a lot, but it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I don't know. I was about to say it's less conspicuously artistic than a lot of the stuff higher up, but it's really not. It's very conspicuously artistic. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, well, I see what you mean. You were like, hey, this is like borderline, just like hardcore or slam. It also borders on the maggot stomp goofiness, right? And so it's just like, you might think, okay, well, we can't put this very high on the list. But yeah, you really like Fluids, and it's a repeated reference point for you. Right?
Yeah, so I think I've tried to even out my list this year to more heavily weigh stuff that I've just been listening to a ton, and just to, I think, to give a more accurate representation of like where I'm really at for the year.
I think I would put, I think I would move up. I think we both put Narboleth at 8. I think we both now think of that as an iconic 2021 record, and that should be 4 or 5 for me. And I would move down Antediluvian, which felt like eating my vegetables, to put that at number 4. And I could move down Morgal, just because I think that was me being doing a bit of a statement. But like track by track, the record could be a lot tighter. You know, like the Narboleth record is definitely better than the Zar, and more important than the Zare Volk record, but I put it behind it. It's definitely better and more important than the Anternose record, but I put it behind it, and probably better and more important than the Morgal, and just more fun than the Antediluvian. So,
well, you know, I think I wouldn't get too caught up in the individual stuff. I mean, like, insofar as, like, it's very difficult. Like, my process for making these lists is, and that will kind of bridge us into the current one, because this year was kind of interesting. This year, there were much fewer records that, like, came across as, like, this is year-end material, but the gap between all those records felt a lot closer, for the most part. Like this one, it's like I couldn't make a top 40 for this year. I think I had like 28 records in the running, and I cut 8 of them. What I do is I make a snap decision. It's like I look through the year, and I'm like, is this record a possibility for year end? I put it on a list, and then I start carving away, and then I start ordering from there. But relatively, you know, in the stuff on the list, I'll say that for the most part, a lot of these slots are very interchangeable. These are all records that I really like, and apart from maybe the top 5 to 10, I think all of it's pretty negotiable with personal taste.
Yeah, I felt about that last year. I was like really just reordering it because I had the list in front of me. But I agree, the specifics aren't that important. I just say Ruins of Beverast more important, Narboleth more important. But for this year, it's like, yeah, honestly, even a firmly ordered top 5 was hard for me this year. And I found myself dividing the list into not like genre-based chunks, but like little micro-niche sounds that had interested me and us over the year. Like specific kinds of aesthetics, so, you know, I ended up with some stuff for like, all the stuff like after the initial first few, right? I ended up with like chunks of like classic sort of stuff that's drawing really well on, noble late 90s black metal, right? Or stuff that is just like wretched and aggressive black metal that's sort of a boot to the teeth of nowadays shit. Or like death metal that I really liked, or weird experimental black metal that I think is promising. And those are all sort of clusters that come up on my list. And actually, I think I ended up going back and keeping at least a couple of them. But I did what I could to try to make it read more like a list and less just like a sort of, less like this typology or something.
The amount of Terminus eventually dissolves as a podcast when it becomes a pure vortex of TBMG's notes that consume him.
I didn't even write any new things. It's purely a list. It is purely a list. But yeah, the other thing, I guess, I mean, we should... Couple things, yeah. I mean, the other thing about my list in particular is that I feel like a lot, the year always ends up... Labels know that to save their best shit for the end of the year, because it's going to be freshest in memory. And so that definitely happened this year. And it really happened with black metal, especially because every black metal band wants their record to come out around Halloween or the winter solstice or whatever, right? Really happened this year. I basically just liked a shit ton of, like, the black metal from most of this year was terrible, and then it turned out that a bunch of really good stuff came out in the last 4 months. But, I haven't really had time to let it sift through it yet. So my list is going to be highly biased towards recent stuff, and it would take another year for me to figure out exactly the order to put them in. But with that, we should talk about the elephant in the room, which is how much black metal sucked this year.
Yeah. We were talking about this probably as soon as, like, April or May of this year, but the first couple of years of Terminus were very black metal heavy. It was just those kinds of years. Black metal was putting out some really, really great stuff consistently, and death metal was lagging behind a little bit. But I feel like that flipped almost completely this year. My year-end list is probably, like, arguably half or more death metal. I think it was an incredibly strong year for death metal. And I think it's interesting, like, what do you think is happening? Do you think it's just an off year, or do you think there's kind of a sea change happening across genres?
Well, we've kind of started tracking it. Once we realized it was happening, we've tried to talk about it for the rest of, track it across the year. And I feel like, I guess my feeling is black metal is at a very late stage in its development. The stuff that is, it's getting increasingly, the stuff that is good is getting increasingly complex, like people introducing sorts of interesting new rhythmic ideas, or people drawing directly on the most comprehensive classical symphonic ideas of basically the Swedish bands and Kvist and stuff in the 90s, right? People are doing very conspicuously ambitious big stuff. At the same time, it's also getting increasingly complex in degenerate ways, and I think that's the biggest trend this year, is this sort of degenerate melodic black metal of various kinds, which has been completely decoupled from the ideas about aggression or directness or power, and is about hooks and the riffs, man.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think that one of the problems is I think there's a lot of quote-unquote black metal records out there this year, and probably in general, that aren't really supposed to be black metal records, but they've been kind of forced into that box. Like, for instance, a record that we talked about this year, and we kind of anticipated being on our year-end list, but I don't think it made it for either of us, was Orderlies by Vehemence, which is actually a really, really good record. I've been listening to it in anticipation of this list to see if it was going to get a slot. And I think that it doesn't, because its remaining black metal elements are the thing holding it back. I think Vehemence is transforming into an incredible extreme power metal band. And really, the least interesting parts of that record are the most black metal. So I wonder if what we're hearing is a lot of guys who really want to break out of the form of black metal and just play something else, but black metal itself has become this all-consuming monster that, this gravity well that sucks in the genres around it and kind of mutates them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, maybe for a while that was a productive process. Maybe it helped other wings of extreme metal, like death metal. Well, it really didn't. It didn't. It was terrible for death metal. It's something like black metal has become a synonym for flowing tremolo riffs. And flowing tremolo riffs and quote-unquote atmosphere, by which we mean reverb. And so that is just at this point, the term is so vacuous that it has almost ceased to mean anything. The notion that, something we reviewed that was pretty representative of things happening with black metal, this sort of straining against its boundaries, was that Imha Tarakat recently. Yeah. Which only becomes interesting when you realize that it could just not be black metal if it wanted to.
Oh, I agree. That's another record that I thought was really interesting. Almost made my list just sort of out of pure curiosity, but I don't like it moment to moment that much, so I can't. But I think Imha Tarakat, that record that's one of the most interesting records of the year. I think everybody should give that a listen just to see something very strange is going on there. It's building almost entirely non-metal music out of black metal parts, and I don't know if the results are for everyone, but I think they're really fascinating.
Yeah, well, it definitely it's going to go live in the sort of Roadburn Records pop metal kind of world, and that's fine. Like, it can be artistic and well executed and live in that world. But it's sort of exiting the black metal underground.
Certainly, yeah.
And it's going to be like main stage with like Sulfur Aeon.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, but like as far as, and I think the band will be the most interesting the more and more he can embrace the non-black metal aspects of it, for sure. But
Agreed.
And on the other end of the spectrum, I've tried to look for, and my list will have some of this, bands in the underground all year that are I feel like basically it's I've said it before, but I feel like it's about time for, there will always be a place for the old guard and the grim bastion and people who are directly practicing the roots of the tradition. I don't think that goes away because we don't believe in progressing beyond that stuff. But a tradition expresses its vitality also in new growth. And when everything becomes very complex and labored or flowery, ornate, sapped of energy, mannered, exaggerated, all traits we've tracked over the last year and really over the last couple years, right? These are things happening in black metal. And most in stuff that we don't even bring on the show, right? The vampire crap, all of the people trying to write watered down GBK and Argoslent riffs, divorced from the manly context, right? All of the, like shit tier Franco-Finnish clones. The list goes on, right?
Yeah.
Bouncy USBM that sounds like pop punk. Just this shit bores me to death, and it has nothing to do with black metal. And even when some of the people who make that are posers who hate black metal, others have their hearts in the right place, but I think are just misguided aesthetically. Right? But I think it's time for a new thing that has a different name and that continues doing that continues the basic spiritual charge of black metal and in a new guise. And so I've tried to look for bands that point toward that, and particularly getting back to notions about physicality, immediacy, live playing, improvisation, etc. And one record for that's an honorary mention that I haven't put on here because it's like an EP or a demo is that new Dresden Streams demo.
Yeah, I can feel you on that one.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, since we've done the preamble, let's see how this year shakes out. So, without further ado, end of year list Terminus Omega 2022.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, and we are back with the actual lists. So, towards the end of my list, what I've got is just a cluster of new and or records by new bands and or sort of flawed but interesting records by established bands and things that all sort of point in good directions towards possibilities for something that is a continuation of black metal but is not black metal, right? So, at the number 20 list, throwback to the very beginning of 2021, and something that became a repeated reference point throughout the year, I'm just going to do Soul Begraved by Syndexioi.
Okay. I figured it would be on there somewhere. I'd actually thought it would be higher up.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I haven't gone back to it that much. And I think it's a very specific mood. It's very, we described it as very sort of dark solar metal in that, it's themed around the cult of Mithras, but specifically, the moment of descent of the sun into the realm of the dead and descent, the bull sacrifice in the cavern, and the difficulty of the sort of striving to contact the original essence of the cult across time, right? This vast cold distance of history. So it's, the imagery is very powerful for the record. It's all like dark blood red stained with black, right? Like glaring sunset kind of stuff. It's a lot like the Oriflamme in terms of its mood, right? The Oriflamme of 2021.
Yeah.
Sort of, and it's, the things that we found interesting about it, we heard it in somewhat different ways, but I think they're both right. I think what we arrived at was basically, you pointed out, highly influenced by summoning, and also by old school heavy metal, which I hadn't noticed so much, but or the basic heavy metal building blocks of black metal, just like big 5-note epic power chord riffs, or 4-note, right? Rhythm guitar, basically chunky rhythm guitar parts, right? Has the base of that, but over this sort of tripping, rolling, medieval-esque martial percussion that is very summoning-esque. And I saw it also as being very martial, black metal emotions and kind of melodic ideas expressed in a martial industrial context. But, as we've said, and as a wise friend of ours said, Summoning is basically a martial industrial band. So it's tapping into the non-metal and non-corny dungeon synth side of Summoning. the melodic sensibility successfully evokes the classical world. There are these. The melodic center is on these spiraling keyboard melodies that are, noble, but also a little bit eerie and also a little bit sensuous. Right?
Mm-hmm. It's got this sort of sumptuous, sort of Dionysian quality to it.
Yes, it is very Dionysian, and of course Dionysus, the cult of Dionysus, although not as directly martial, was also a cult of blood sacrifice and sort of, this moment of total sort of release from stricture and excess and abandon. So there's some. Although Mithras is a cult of discipline and Dionysus is a cult of excess or transgression, they're closely related in some ways.
Yeah. So yeah, this one unsurprisingly didn't make it onto my list. This is an extremely you record. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we agree and our tastes kind of align more and more on a lot of stuff as the show goes on. But I think this is a case where it is firmly in your corner. I recognize what it is and I respect it, but it's certainly not the sort of thing that I listen to. It's just a little bit too bare and stoic for me, I guess. I don't know. I need my shit a little more emotive, but.
I'm not sure that, so yeah, and there were certain reservations about it that you had that I'm not sure I agree with, but I think often I end up arguing with you on the show, and then I'm like, Death Metal Guy had a point. And in this case, I'm like, I think I'm more okay with the sort of keyboardy, ambient-y tracks on it than you, but something about it does feel like the project is still germinating.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So it's a really cool idea that's incomplete. I think if I'd had more time to just be sort of like mystic chillin' in the summer, I would have listened to it more, but I had very little time to do that. And a thing I would say is you could equally put at the number 20 slot, you could pretty much equally put the Vlado record, which I think you liked better.
I liked the Vlado record. It didn't make it onto my list, though.
Yeah.
Very good Blazebirth Hall worship, but I mean that's kind of what it amounts to is Blazebirth Hall worship, which is totally fine. I've got some worship records on this, but you've got more important Blazebirth Hall records to talk about, and also since you put Sindexio on, I wonder if you're going to have the companion record in a very similar vein that we covered later in the year, but I guess we'll find out when we come to it. So number 20 for me, 20 is always just kind of a fun slot for me to throw in, just like something that I love, and frequently it would be like unbearable to you. And this may or may not be a case of that. This is a record that you were not on to review. I covered this one with Hyper Shaman early in the year, and it's just such a singular, ridiculous fucking thing that I'm in love with it on conceit alone, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. And that is going to be Intestinal Engorgement's Putrefying Consumption of Dismemberment. I am well established as a massive fan of Enmity, but the Enmity idea is one relatively underexplored until recent years in brutal death metal, and Intestinal Engorgement really marks the first time there has ever been a full-fledged attempt at an Enmity worship project. This is categorically attempting to replicate Enmity. There are certain adjustments. I think that it's interesting to interpret this record as like, it's working with the standard timbres and sort of ideas of brutal death metal in 2022, where Enmity was doing that with the conventions of, I think it was around, 2003, 2004. So you're going to have a different kind of audio quality there, but the philosophy is the same. Sort of collage noise made of brutal death metal parts. The review me and Hyper Shaman did is really interesting if anyone hasn't heard it, because we have a theory that maybe maybe this record is made up of indecipherable micro chunks, just recorded and then cut and paste and strung together in sort of an arbitrary fashion, is because there is no logic whatsoever to the songwriting. But like I said, the 20 slot for me is just something really fun. That's a sound that's near and dear to my heart, and I was just really stoked to hear a band doing that for the first time in my memory.
Yeah, it's Enmity is cool. I cannot remember how this one sounded, although I did enjoy some of your Brutal Death picks from this year. Mm-hmm. Maybe some others will come from those episodes that I wasn't on.
Yeah,
and maybe there will be a few more of those later. But I mean, you've gushed about Enmity for as long as I've known you, so I'm glad they finally did it.
I get a little bit more, just enough to keep me through. Looking at the noose like, not today, old friend. But that's really all I've got to say about that one. So if you want to continue.
Yeah, next one is, as you thought, the Surtur Wounds record.
Oh, I didn't think you were going to pair them up immediately like that.
I am, because it's just, that's what I said. My list ended up sort of idea clustery. Mm-hmm. This was a later year release. It has the advantage of being sort of composed like, having sort of big texture washed soundscapes and a strange heathen ambiance, kind of like the Syndexioi. It has a similar thing of being quite dark in a way that most black metal forgets how to be, while also manly and life-affirming, like the Syndexioi. However, it also has the advantage of sounding like a fucking bulldozer.
Yeah.
It has gigantic chug riffs. We argued about where those chug riffs were coming from. You said, it sounds like sludge metal, basically, or, sort of...
I was going in kind of a trad doom direction.
Trad doom, bluesy trad doom riffs. I don't know that area very well, but, could be. On the other hand, I was thinking more like Peaceville Doom or things like Bolt Thrower or Cobalt or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or, any of my obsessions with kind of Amoebics-based chug music. I think it basically functions like Amoebics-based chug music, but whether that's where it's coming from, I don't know. And there are a bunch of riffy flourishes on it that are not really part of that tradition. Mm-hmm. Those sort of pentatonic intervals and bends and stuff like that. So it has a very... so there's something very... It's like activating the black metal potential of the stenchcore thing, but it's also has an immediacy to it, and it's if there's anything that's a limiting factor about it, it's just that the last part, I don't know, there's cool stuff on the last part of the record. It sort of builds towards the most black metal song, which is a good strategy. The Syndexioi does that too, right? And in that, you can hear black metal being shifted from the defining structure, right, the genre that's the overriding form of the thing, to part of the technique or vocabulary of the music, right? Mm-hmm. Black metal is no longer the end-all, be-all structuring principle. It's now a thing to draw from in certain places. That's interesting. However, the getting there on the back half of the record is a bit vaguer, a bit less developed. I feel like the band is best when they're doing the spacey wash stuff and the just rolling chug riffs. And so I think it'd need to be developed more in that direction.
Yeah, I think I definitely liked this one more than the Syndexioi, even though I feel like it's the same kind of idea at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. I think the Surtur Wounds was just a little bit more immediate. There was more to grab onto. There was less sort of ambient stuff, which, as you said, and I agree with, I can kind of take or leave the sort of dungeon synthy stuff. Mm-hmm. No, I like this one, and I think that it's interesting I think it's really interesting that two bands with such a sort of focused niche emerged at the same time.
Yes.
You know, maybe it's the same guy or something. I don't know, but I think it's really interesting. Just the idea. Well, you know, once is just a one-off, and there's no coincidences. So two is a pattern for us. So I wonder if we're going to see more of this stuff coming in years to follow, because I can kind of associate both those bands with a take on it that I like more, sort of like Halyaruna. The way they blend, you know, black and sort of epic heavy metal with these sort of dungeon synth and martial industrial ideas.
Yeah.
There's something going on. There's something in the water. And I think this is very germinal for whatever this style might be. But I'd definitely be interested to hear where these guys go in the future. So yeah, number 19 for me. As you can probably guess from the intro, not a lot of straight up black metal records on my list for this year, because honestly, there was a lot of stuff that was very capable, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that just really grabbed me and made me continue listening through the year. But this is one of a small handful of those that did make it there. This is from pretty early in the year. This is from our second episode of 2022, actually. And this is a band that I just kind of fell in love with and ended up talking to the guys and kind of made friends with them. And everything they've done since has been equally awesome and austere. So this is Isatai's Invoking in Darkness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so for people, I mean, that was almost a year ago now that we covered that. So for those who don't remember, Isatai plays a really interesting, very stripped down and minimal style of sort of Franco-Finnish black metal. Highly melodic, but everything is broken down into sort of its elemental chording ideas. It becomes, after a fashion, a sort of reconstruction of a theoretical heritage of current USBM trends. Does that make any sense to you? It's like it's the linking idea between Judas Iscariot and modern, more florid USBM stuff. And I just think it's really good. Isatai's music has immense replay value just because they're these simple but highly engaging songs with very memorable riffing ideas. And I like the sort of austere, minimal quality of it. I've been liking more and more really flashy melodic black metal, and Isatai rejects that conceit by going back to the roots of. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you finish your sentence.
So yeah, I like that they're taking the sort of elaborate melodic black metal ideas, but they're bringing them back to the origin of those in the mid to late 90s by breaking it down into simple power chord riffs. And I just think it's a really excellent exercise for this kind of minimal, colder style that I don't usually hang out in that much.
Yeah, well, you basically just said it, but one thing that sets it apart is he really has the chops for the nowadays melodic stuff. Mm-hmm. He really can understand. He knows the densest, most complex Satanic War Master chord shapes, or like he can probably play the chivalric BM riff at the end of My Kingdom of Darkness, or something like that. He's there's sort of a richness in it that comes from mastering this style as it's developed, but nevertheless he just focuses on the chords rather than the long flourishing melodic ideas. But the other thing, which I think you didn't mention as much, and I think bears mentioning about Isatai, is the trenchcoat factor.
Yeah, very trenchcoat.
The songs are really produced and structured much more like burly, almost black and roll early 2000s stuff. And mood-wise, it has as much to do with DSBM, which is understatedly an enormous influence on modern black metal sensibility, because that was part of where uniformly consonant, hypnotic, melodic hook riffs were coming from. Yeah, and it's also the gateway drug to a lot of metalheads accessing stuff like post-punk and shoegaze for the first time. Yeah, but Isatai is sort of like burly and dynamic. So yeah, I think that record is really cool. Honestly, I could have put it somewhere on my list, and I'm glad you covered it. Yeah, I think that it's a great pick for
people that listen to this show. I think that it's the kind of record, there's a few black metal records on my list this year that reach their apex when you've been listening to black metal for a long time, and you can see how they kind of play with and sometimes break the rules of convention. I think someone who's been listening to black metal for 10 years gets way more out of Isatai than a starter.
For sure, and that's one of the nice things about, like, when you're in this late stage in a genre, the good bands are the ones that have that deep grasp of a tradition and speak to people who also get it. Right?
Yeah.
You know, you can really appreciate the craft in a way that's harder when everyone's just inventing the craft. But yeah, so my 18. Here's one that, you know, we talked a fair bit about, but I feel like it got kind of lost in the most rough kind of patch for Terminus this year, and I think maybe in an eclectic episode. But that is Arma, Serpent Storm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was with Vermin Womb and Solemnity, and the episode was just kind of a grab bag.
Yeah, it was definitely a weird one.
It was when I was just barely trying to hold it together. I feel like I didn't really do a good review again until like the Ares Kingdom Galicia thing. But
I think you did. I think you did solid on the Armagh. I think it's also a difficult record to talk about.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Yeah, and we got kind of in the weeds. But yeah, so the Armagh, I guess my overall feeling about the Armagh is this is a very interesting band from Poland. They would describe it as like satanic speed metal or something, and the music is really pulling in two directions. They could either be up there with Eisenhand as the best sort of banging traditional new wave of British heavy metal style stuff in Europe, play big festivals, you know, date hot chicks with leather jackets, whatnot, right? And if they did, good on them, and they should just develop it more in that direction. But what really interests me is the way they are playing often very extreme black metal ideas with a really weird kind of guitar tone, which is drawn much more from the 70s and from Graveland at its jangliest and weirdest. You know, they're Polish. It ends up being the direction I hope black metal moves is much more this kind of mid-tempo, barbaric, inflected, improvised, intuitive aesthetic, right? The Syndaxioi and the Surtur Wounds both kind of have that. This really has that. There is outstanding musicianship of the kind I value most, I think. Passages of sort of it's almost all very clean, kind of watery guitar, and there'll be passages that just really sound like folk instruments being tremolo picked. And also this really cool activation of the earliest roots of heavy metal, like Led Zeppelin, which people are afraid to be influenced by because it's too good. Along with that comes some missteps. So I think we agree. I think maybe there were more of a stopping point for you, but there's some kind of lame boogie rock moments on the record. And those would all, if they go more in the heavy metal direction, that would just stay and be fine. But like, there's some stuff I could forget. And also there's there's earlier records that just have this creator-like intensity and heavy distortion that in some sense are just better than Serpent Storm. But I think Serpent Storm is sort of, it's grasping and it's moving in so many directions, and there's such a density of ideas and so much potential that I hope kind of they take this as the starting point and then just drive it back to that extremity of their earlier stuff.
Yeah, I figured this one would be on your list. Unsurprisingly, it didn't make mine, and you pretty much said it for me. The unevenness of the record is what really kind of halts it for me. I think Armagh, at their best, firing on all cylinders, are really excellent and could be like Eisenhand tier. But it's a very strange record in that individual songs will have, you know, riffs that are non-starters for me next to just immense heavy metal bangers. But But I think, in a sense, that's part of the charm. I think a record that makes me feel very divisive things within the same record means that they have a real point to what they're doing. You know, it's not arbitrary. It's not a failure.
It's like if totally. They're taking risks, and that's good. The other best way of describing it is it's like they came up with this weird concept which could produce something terrible. They're like, what if there was a fully fledged pagan black metal band in 1979?
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating idea. They do a really cool job with it. I feel like in that episode, I was listening to your criticisms and trying to, I think take them seriously, and I think they were totally legit, but I feel like I almost didn't plug it as hard as I wanted to, so I'm going to plug it now. Serpent Storm, it's on Bandcamp. Everything else this band has released is incredible, and I would say they had great shirts for the last album, Cold Wrath of Mother Earth, except I bought the last ones.
There you go. All right, my number 18, almost certainly not on your list. This is sort of the inversion of the Armagh. This is a record that I can get really into just because I like the long hair reference points more than you do. And I really just appreciate how sort of wild and woolly it is, and the deep conceit of its theming and its musical ideas. And that's going to be Doldrum with the knocking or the story of the sound that preceded their disappearance. It's just a fucking bizarre record. It really doesn't sound like much out there except for certain kinds of really weird experimental prog black stuff that was happening in like the early 2000s, late 90s occasionally. It has an incredibly distinct feeling. The atmosphere that it explores is very novel. I think they have a wonderful way of marrying a unified aesthetic together. Visually, lyrically, musically, every aspect reinforces every other. The only question is, for most listeners, moment to moment, what's it going to be like? And it's a tough record. It's certainly not everyday listening for even the weirdest and nerdiest among us. However, in certain moods, it really hits a spot that nothing else does. It's really, there's certainly records that I listen to much more than this one, but this is one of the most unique records that, honestly, I think we've ever featured on the show. And I think it's really awesome. I think that it's really cool to hear that something so kind of unusual can be done with this familiar musical vocabulary. And, I just really ended up appreciating it for that alone.
Yeah, it's one of those records that could either be a one-off and, as you say, kind of retro-progressive, like things like how proggy metal sounded in the 2000s, or it could be really generative in ways that are hard to foresee, right?
I agree.
It also has that quality of people will hear it as like Disso Black, but it isn't really a black metal record.
No, it's not.
And so that is a generative thing. And it does have some of the qualities I've been interested as far as getting beyond black metal. It's very rhythmic, very percussive. The music is organized in a different way. There's immediate contact with hardcore influence and shit like that. Parts of that record are just electrifying throwdown moments for me. And parts of them are just kind of like a chore.
The noodly stuff probably doesn't do much for you.
We have great respect for that circle of musicians, and so all due respect there. It's not exactly my thing, but also I'm going to say the thematics are really cool. It's a very interesting take on, I suppose, the outlaw rock aesthetic in general, and it is a frontier Americana, but it is focused on this sort of esoteric mythos about a subterranean world accessible through the mines and the caves, and the troglodytic beings who may or may not dwell there. And as someone who's been getting more interested in the sort of conspiratorial fringes of Sasquatch discourse, I find that pretty cool.
Excellent.
I just really wanted to say the phrase conspiratorial Sasquatch discourse.
Yeah.
Because it sounded like a description you would write of something that I said. Anyway, so on to number 17. So if the previous records were things that like I just, have just a great records I feel a great spiritual affinity with, and that I think are these sort of like have the flawed quality of things that are generative and in flux, and the vortex is still resolving and clarifying. This is a basically perfect record that is not exactly my thing, but it's awesome. Mm-hmm. So this is Psychroptic's Divine Counsel.
Oh, no, I think that's totally fair. I mean, it didn't make my list just because I've got more tech stuff, sort of tech death metal stuff on there, but it's an excellent record.
Yeah, big riff go burr. I mean, it's...
Big complicated riff go burr. Jesus, man, some of the guitar work on that album.
Yeah, the sticking point for me that would make it not like routine play, and what the sticking point for many will be the distorted and layered deathcore vocals, which really are, you just, I don't know, if you're serious about extreme music, you learn to listen past vocals that are not your thing. So, and, if you can do it with like bizarre yelping, Lithuanian NSBM vocals, like you can do it with this.
Yeah.
So man up. And the thing that's cool about it is that it is big, it is heavy, it is amazing, it is immediate, and it is also structurally extremely sophisticated, has a long form narrative, and builds these sort of majestic, heroic atmospheres that you would associate more with black metal. And there are just, as you said, the musicianship is incredible and not in a masturbatory way. It's kind of understated and astonishing riffing.
Yeah, really everything that you said, and I guess really it's cool to hear a record that reinforces the reasons why a lot of us when we were younger got into polished tech death. I mean, I think everyone agrees that is a route that has really gone downhill over the past probably 8 to 10 years or so. However, Psychroptic is one of the originary bands in that style, and there's a reason they're still kicking so many years later. It's a fantastic record, and even if it's not on my list, I highly recommend it.
It's just really heavy, and sometimes it's nice to listen to something that's really heavy.
Exactly. All right, so number 17, I'm guessing this will probably be the first duplicate between our lists. This is a record that you brought on from a band that you've been insisting that I listen to for a long time now. Finally experienced it. Yes, it is extremely good, and it is one of the best straight up, sort of like no qualifiers black metal records of the year, and that is Asgrau's Facade.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's just a really, really good melodic black metal record. It has an interesting quality in that you can see the resemblance in the riffing style to German stuff and French stuff and Swedish stuff, but it also has its own unique inflection. It's stripped down to a certain degree, like everything feels very untreated on it, like you're listening to a very clean rehearsal room recording or something. And it really draws it really draws your ear to the way these riffs are composed, which is sort of taking the most like eyebrow-raising turns you might hear in a French riff and basing whole riffs on that. So there's a simultaneous familiarity and unfamiliarity with the content of the record. There's stuff that strikes you as, oh, this is one of those kind of, more modern, pop-punky black metal riffs descended from Satanic Warmaster, but they'll twist it just enough so that it feels very fresh and new. I don't think that I have a ton to say about, like, very specific niche stuff about this record, just because I'm not nearly as well acquainted with the Dutch scene as you are. But I think this is a great deep cut black metal record that still has surprises for people who have been listening to this kind of music for many years.
Yeah, it's at a similar position on my list. I'll just talk about it when I get to it.
All right.
Next one, number 16. Not Asgra. It's Rot as Darkness Burns.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. So this is a big release for our friends at House of Igra Records, and it was a late year one. I think it almost didn't make it on the show because we were just trying to figure out, okay, what can we fit before the year ends, and we figured we had to cover this. Rot is apparently the formative black metal band from Vietnam. And what we found out, but like recording a full length for the first time after, some demos way back in the day. And what we found out is that Rot is a lot more than that. And you could view it either as, like profoundly reactionary in the best sense of the word, or as forward thinking in that way, because it's cutting away a lot. It's just clearing the decks of almost everything that has accumulated around black metal in the last 20 years. And you could see it as second wave worship, but it's really not. It's the death metal guy calls it 1.5 wave. It seems like it has the complete atmospheric and spiritual qualities of the Norwegian scene, but in 1991 or 2. Like the sort of thing Euronymous would have been looking to put on Death Like Silence when he was starting it. People who would have been tape trading with them back in the day. It sounds there's a ton of death metal in it, a lot of Morbid Angel, and some of the Swedish Black Death stuff at its most primitive and death metal-y is a big presence there. You could imagine a very raw necrophobic as having a place on this, but and it is records like this are sometimes all attitude and de-emphasizing the riffcraft. That's not the case here. There's just immaculate craftsmanship, and often these like very succinct, sometimes even deliberately truncated ideas that are nevertheless extremely clear and memorable and, above all, powerful. Right? The thing black metal has lost sight of is the riff as delivery of force, and Rot has not.
Yeah, agreed on all accounts. Excellent record, and I'll be talking about it myself shortly.
All right.
I'm surprised it made it on your list, but that's really cool, and I'm glad that we agree on that one. Number 16 is actually going to be another record that you weren't around for. I used some of the episodes with Hyper Shaman as like clearinghouse for just stuff that I know I'm immediately going to like, that both of us are going to like. This is, I think, this is my first repeated entry onto top 20 lists for the show. And it is, predictably, given that qualification, Numa Hagion's Demiurge. I don't really have a ton to say about it because Demiurge is very naturally more of the same that we heard on Voidgazer. There's been, some slight evolutions and embellishments in some of the riffing and rhythmic ideas, but fundamentally, Numa Hagion is there to be Numa Hagion, and Demiurge stands up to Voidgazer in just about every way. For those who didn't hear Voidgazer last year, or was it year before? Well, either way, for those who hadn't heard Voidgazer, it is extremely pummeling death metal, sort of in the vein of as though Gateways to Annihilation era Morbid Angel had been informed by beatdown hardcore or NYDM, making for something that's like otherworldly and atmospheric, but just immensely physical. Anyone who enjoyed the first record will enjoy the second record. The only reason it's not placed as high on the list as that record was for its respective year is just because there's been way more death metal competition. But I would say it's just as good as the first record and well worthy of a listen by anyone that enjoys that sound.
I'm not sure I even realized that came out this year.
Yeah, me and Hyper Shaman didn't know. Well, we'll put it this way. You liked the first one, you'll like this one. It is phenomenal, and it also has more sick death metal lyrics that are extremely audible.
Nice. And we are back from a quick break and drinking water, that most dreaded of minerals, to discuss the next 5 on our list. So we're going from 15 through 11. Number 15 for me is Asgrau's Facade.
There we go.
Right, that was number what for you?
Number 17 for me, so very similar spots.
Yeah, so we've about felt it out, and as the black metal guy, I'm going to put it higher on my list. Just a really good record. A good way to get into Asgrau or Dutch black metal in general. I would say it combines, well, before I go there, it has sort of the distinct grayness of Dutch black metal, but where sometimes that's a steely gray. The cover of Asgrau, of this new record shows, here it's kind of a misty, bleak kind of gray, cloudy. The mood sort of integrates the kind of gloom of the last one, Isval, with the energy and anger and the greater expressive range of Gnostic. And so you get something that is sort of wildly mournful. And it's activating big hooky ideas from symphonic black metal, even as you pointed out, like early Dimmu Borgir or something, to at the same time just direct punk influence, which has always been important for this band, just deep this undercurrent of D-beat energy, also very much in the vocals, which are just awesome and show a big range from sort of shouts to screams, etc. But the core of it is this, this guitar style that they've spent a long time honing that involves sort of like sort of lush, impressionistic chords, but delivered with a lot of discipline and energy. Other than that, I guess you were mentioning influences earlier. I was going to say we always talk about the cornerstone of this sound probably being kind of Toka or something. In terms of the Dutch guitar style. Yeah, this is just a good record. It's a really good black metal record. It's economical, but it doesn't stint on any of the power or expanse you would want. It's very autumnal. It might be somewhat limited to seasonal listening, I think. But that's okay. Like a lot of great black metal records are. They have their season. That's kind of part of the music because it's tapped into nature and all that. So, really cool. If anything, life was kind of a blur when we reviewed that. So I'd like to go back and spend more time with it. But yeah, just congrats to Asgrau. This is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a very good record. I already gave my main thoughts on it, but just jumping off something you said, it is extremely approachable. It's more approachable than a lot of the Dutch stuff. And I think you've been showing me more and more of the Dutch scene since we've been doing the show because you're really passionate about it. And I like a lot of it, but I think in a lot of cases, a lot of the stuff we were covering was sort of like down the line bands that were focusing on like aspects of this. When I listen to Asgrau, I feel like I have like a much more well-rounded idea of what makes the Dutch style. So
yeah, absolutely. Yes, exactly. This band brings it all together. And also this record in particular, I agree, it is more it sounds more like, quote, normal black metal without losing the regional identity.
Yeah, I think it's very good. I think it'd be a great like primer record for people that want to get into this scene. So number 15 for me was kind of a pick that surprised even me. This is a band I've had a long and kind of contentious relationship with. They released another record this year of many, many records in a long discography. And I thought it was extremely good the first time we listened to it. And then we covered it on the show and I really liked it. And then it just kept coming into my head and I just kept going back to it. And that is Immolation's Acts of God, which is, Yeah, it ended up being probably the first Immolation record that I've really unequivocally enjoyed in a lot of years. I think sort of similar to the stuff that you said about Satanic Warmaster's new record, you were talking about how it was in some way sort of an updated version of Strength and Honor. I would say that Acts of God really feels like an updated version of something like a Dawn of Possession, their very first record. Because I just feel like a lot of the bloat's been cut away on these songs. They're a little bit more direct, more aggressive. They've got some of that, like, real NYDM and Morbid Angel fire that Immolation had in their earliest work. Mm-hmm. Immolation really cut their teeth and became famous on broader, more abstract, more atmospheric music, but Acts of God sounds like them paring it back to make a really just aggressive fucking death metal record. Mm-hmm. And as a result, it's, I think, the best they've done in several records now. And I ended up really enjoying it.
Awesome, dude. I'm glad that's on here. It had occurred to me to add, but then I forgot to, like, it. When you have a bigger record like that, it's like, okay, where can I fit this in? Mm-hmm. And then, like, it just dropped out of the picture. I guess my sort of, like, big, massively produced mainstream death metal record was the Psychroptic this time.
I gotcha.
But, like, Immolation totally could have been on my list. If there's anything else I wanted to highlight about it, part of the greater aggression and physicality, or immediate physicality, might be the more Death Doom. Like hearing how much they have to do with both the early Gothic Death Doom bands and like Winter and things like that. This record feels very... there's plenty of blasting, but it is... And it doesn't drag, but it's sort of... It's sort of massive and slow in a powerful way.
It's more traditionally heavy than Immolation has been in a very long time.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So, cool. I'll have to go listen to that one again. All right, 14 for me. This is Corpsest, Succumb to Rot.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, speaking of sort of more traditionally aggressive death metal, right? This is a Finnish death metal band that you brought on the show. Mm-hmm. And although I think we're both proud of turning on each other onto a number of things on this show. One cool thing that I'm proud I've managed to get the death metal guy into a strain of European death metal, which is Finn death.
Yeah.
Although I guess I really should credit Sepulchral Curse for that because, it was their record that did it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you brought this on. It's awesome. It is a sort of... I think the thing we liked about it at the time was although it's very heavy, but the composition is understated. There's little, if anything, that you could point out as the big riff. It has the characteristic Finnish death metal thing, which is kind of like Immolation, actually, right? In that it always has this black metal adjacency. Mm-hmm. It evokes some of the vast landscapes and Gothic cathedral atmospheres of black metal, but while remaining very firmly death metal in all of its instrumentation and all of its riffing. And so you'll have big kind of arcing trem riffs that are definitely not black metal riffs and are not more melodic Swedish death metal riffs or anything like that. And you'll also have a lot of just demigod style jugga jugga bolt thrower stuff, atmospheric bolt thrower riffing. Some heavy beatdown moments, some cool drama building over the course of the record. Really neat blasting part. It's kind of Ripakulu-ish. If there's a reservation I have about it, it might be too well produced. Might be too well produced, and I feel like I listened to it a ton. Like, one measure of quality is, do I keep listening to it after we cover it?
Yeah.
And in that case, I did, but it was like in the month after. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I haven't really come back to it. So I think I would say this is a very good, cool death metal record that proves Finland is the best at this.
Yeah, excellent record. We're going to have a lot of crossover on our list this year because I'll be talking about that later. And I just want to say that's a really cool pick coming from you, because that's just such like working man's death metal stuff. You know, it's really cool to see you pick that one for your year-end list.
Shucks, thanks, bro.
Yeah, so I'll get to that one, my thoughts on it a little bit later. But first, number 14, one that you've covered already, and it looks like we just inverted this band in Asgrau. This is Rot with As Darkness Burns.
Nice.
I'm really stoked to see that both of us had this on our list, because actually I gotta say my list this year is really heavily on the Terminus Co-Prosperity Sphere side. A lot of people coming back, a lot of friends of ours submitting new material to us. And definitely, I feel you get into a situation when you run a show like this where you're thinking, ooh, you know, how many bonus points am I subconsciously awarding? You know, just because they're tight with us. But in this case, having both of us pick it independently kind of confirms this is just a fucking cool record, man. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as far as the style goes, I don't know if I've heard a more convincing take on this sort of, you know, 1990, 1991 era black metal. I think the reference points for this are super cool. I was talking to Huang Dao from L Crossed about this, who is one of the guys who runs House of Igra. And apparently a lot of the reference points we got as far as sort of like 1.5 wave, as we call it, were accurate. And that is a lot of what they listen to is stuff like Tormentor and other shit like that. Some of the specific comparisons are escaping me. It is a remarkably sophisticated record in its sort of deliberate lack of sophistication. Very simple songs, but very sparing, carefully composed riffs, real physical presence, and as you mentioned, substantial death metal influence gives this a burly quality that a lot of black metal records, especially even ones that I really like, usually lack. I just think it's an incredibly well-rounded record, and even though it took them so long to get to it, you can really hear how this band would be generative and would inspire a new scene in Vietnam. Just very, very cool record. I'm going to get a lot of plays out of that, I think.
I think another thing about the 1 point, why it's convincing, I like that you said that, about a convincing 1.5 wave, is that it's not retro. It's not like this mannered exercise in reconstructing a time, which can be interesting, but it's kind of like listening to a history lesson or a zine article, right? Mm-hmm. This is very vital music, and it suggests that, you know, back at that period was a bunch of stuff that's been missed in black metal. Only other thing I'd add is that I guess was important in the review is that, you know, it really thrashes. It's a very fast album, and it has a lot of just like ripping 1-2 beats and downbeat thrash, which is that Dark Angel thing, which is totally missing. Doctor, 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 doctor. Nobody does that anymore.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's pulling on the coolest stuff of stuff like thrash and first wave black metal that tends to be forgotten when people try to imitate it. But Rot really centers on the coolest things about those styles and successfully incorporates them. It's a very, very cool record.
All right, so now we're going to do another one that I bet is also on your list. I'm getting the sense that in this year, which was quite disappointing for overall black metal, and we had sort of similar complaints about it, I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of alignment with these lists. So, next up, number 13 is Arid from the U.S. This is From Anthropophagic Waste Breeds a Writhing Mutagenesis.
Very nice pick.
Yeah. Maybe I should ask you to read that one. You're the death metal title guy.
From Anthropophagic... God damn it. From Anthropophagic Waste Breeds a Writhing Mutagenesis. Yeah.
Boom, nice, second try. So this was actually a tip from a patron of ours who is a big fan of the label that put this out. I think it was Death Hymns. Mm-hmm. This is very cool. As far as black metal bands that are a boot in the teeth of nowadays decadent sort of pseudo BM fluff, this is another one, like Rot or something. But this is very avant-garde in a lot of ways, and in touch with the most generative extremes of, say, war metal, right? It's something I see it as being akin to Concrete Winds. This is music adjacent black metal. It's the grinding, manic, tempo varied energy of A Blaze in the Northern Sky, but delivered with much stranger chording that could only happen in 2022. Just blown out noise production that again could not happen then. Interesting rhythmic stuff that wouldn't happen then, and all the goofy shit cut out. Not that the goofy shit we don't love about that record, right? You know, A Blaze in the Northern Sky, but this is very serious. And one of the things that marks it as a serious, not just a niche exercise, but a serious bit at a comprehensive BM album is that there's an understated ear for powerful, kind of mournful melody. And very eerie melody that comes in at certain times. There's huge variation in track length and tempo. Some of the best ones are the ones where it becomes just like war metal or brutal death, and you just get these pulsing, fluctuating wave of sound. You know, there's just this hurtling shape in air, right? It's no longer really a riff. This is an exciting band that remembers the extreme in extreme metal.
Number 13 for me is Arid, from Anthropophagic Wastebrain to Writhing Mutagenesis. 2 years in a fucking row, dude. We did it with Narbaleth last year. Same record and same placement. That is fucking ridiculous.
13.
Dude, this record is fucking awesome. And it's become like a sleeper hit with like Terminus listeners and patrons, which is really awesome to see. You emphasized sort of the most black metal parts of it. I really want to emphasize that this should just be listened to as well by just like grindcore people and gore grind people. Because that's the weird thing is I listened to this more and I was thinking about like, what's the vibe here that's intriguing me so much? What this really feels like to me in terms of atmosphere is some of the weirdest, most atmospheric gore grind stuff that I've heard. Talking about stuff like Lymphatic Phlegm or Paracasidioi from Mexico, Gruesome Malady, just lots of like weird bands that are from like the deep gore grind underground. And I think it's because Arid really, even coming from a black metal identity after a fashion, appreciates extremity and walls of noise and sort of crumbling distortion in a way that I'm much more used to from records with dead women on the cover. It's like honestly, like I would say Arid ironically did the best gore grind album of the year. It's fascinating to listen to, and I think in a sense it's almost suffering from its own marketing in that I really like the aesthetic of this music, but what it suggests is a sort of Instagram raw black metal when that's not what's happening here at all. This is the most putrid 2000s CDR raw black meets intense, sophisticated grind stuff, and it makes for just a phenomenal record.
Well, if we talked about it being relevant to any black metal scene in particular, it'd be Rusty Axe Records, right? Another way of putting it would be this is true necro tone.
And Rusty Axe is one of my main markers for like CDR black metal from the O's.
It could have a cool, the cover is sort of abstract and tasteful. This could have a cool cover, like this could just have some sort of much more in your face, bizarre kind of aggressive cover art. But the other, you're totally right about the gore grind thing, and I think that's the important thing. This record is another one that points beyond black metal. I started with A Blaze in the Northern Sky, but how do you go beyond the thing? You return to the roots. This has the musical structures are no longer conventional black metal structures, and I guess the sensibility is coming in large part from gore grind and brutal death and stuff. That makes total sense.
Yeah, that is really cool that we both have this. I really like this record, and I can't wait to hear more from this guy.
All right. So at number 12, because it had to be on the list, but there wasn't like a definite place to put it, Grand Belial's Key, Kohanic Charmers. So that will be somewhere on your list, probably much higher.
I'm kind of surprised it's on yours, frankly.
Well, respect where respect is due, right? Like, I'm not going to not put the GBK record on my list. It's, I trust, with certain things that are really up your alley, I'm going to trust your take on it to some degree. And the list is not just a list of what was the most fun for me this year. It's like, if anything, it has to be more a list of what did I think was musically important.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I agree with you that it also has to be, most of it has to be stuff I've listened to again, right? Or can really see myself listening to again. In this case, maybe not so much. I would say the reason it's not on the top 10, right, is that it didn't, like, make me want to listen to GBK more.
Yeah.
GBK has never exactly been my thing. And I think of those earlier I think there would be some of the earlier records would be more up my alley. The neoclassical or Baroque moments on this record are astonishingly good. The flamenco-like guitar flourishes. I can appreciate the elaborate song structures, although I think they might be a little elaborate for me. But that's just because, like, I'm not as big a fan of some of the meat and potatoes Jalal riffs on this. Like, what is the basic building block riffs of GBK are not exactly my thing, in part because they're weirdly rock and roll, right? And so we've talked about that. That's the secret agent man riff, etc.
Yeah.
But, there's one tendency that's happening incipiently in the underground is, I think, how do we maybe regenerate black metal by returning to these weird long lost roots, right? I was talking about that with the Arma and their, clearly 70s rock Zeppelin thing, or early speed metal. And GBK is maybe kind of a touchstone for all of that, because that's kind of always how he's been working, and it's especially obvious on this record.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that. It's like, I'll be talking more about it later on, but I think that you've got a really good take on it, in that some of the things that you're not into are like defining qualities, and even if they're not personally to your taste, you kind of don't want to remove them, because it's just like an essential part of what makes GBK.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So number 12 for me is a record that, when I was drafting my list, it's like, what albums jump out as obvious year-end list stuff? I kind of threw this on here just because, I didn't know if it would place. But then I kept, pulling other albums off and leaving this one on. And I realized I do enjoy this more than most of what I've heard this year. And it's a real dark horse. This is Blood Chalice with the Blasphemous Psalms of Cannibalism.
I knew that'd be on your list.
Oh, yeah. What you knew before me. It's like a Stabat Mater situation. This is just one of the most fun records of the year. I think this is way up there in terms of pure entertainment value. And I've come to realize, I guess I didn't really think about it before, but I really just love this style of like Finnish Black Death, of just big, stompy archgoat riffs. And, I have a lot of fun with that whole aesthetic. Yeah, goats fucking killing nuns and shit. Yeah, that's great. It appeals to the, like, death metal dumb guy sensibility. But what really sets the Blood Chalice record apart is that it's really like 80% a death metal album. It's sort of couched in black metal aesthetic choices, but fundamentally it's a mixture of death metal and sort of latent Celtic frostisms. And really, Blood Chalice arises above a lot of its contemporaries just through smart songwriting choices, good pacing, moment-to-moment riffing that is better than all but the best in this style. I think this is a record where there's not a ton of really nuanced stuff to say, but it's a flawless execution on a very specific conceit. And it's just a hell of a good time. It's a great party record. It's a great throw-on anytime record. It's concise. It's punchy. It's very well executed. And it's just a ton of fun every time you play it.
Yeah, not a lot to add. I mean, I considered it. I just felt like, yeah, it wasn't on mine because it's just kind of a down the line genre exercise.
Yeah, that's
But
fair.
like, and I haven't gone. It's like it's extremely well executed, but like it wasn't. It doesn't have like particular riffs that are bringing it back to me or something, bringing me back to it or something. But it is really good. I was very impressed when we heard it. I'm glad it's on your list. It deserves to be on one of them. Yeah, I guess if there's anything that makes it not this kind of down the line genre exercise, it's the death metal aspect. And I think there's a big war metal stuff only gets more interesting the more death metal you put in it.
Yeah.
All right. The death metal guy had to field a call, but we are back with number 11. So, you actually had a really good there was a good segue in terms of a lot of the best war metal these days, really emphasizing the death metal aspect. And I can't think of a better example of that than Imprecation with In Nomine Diaboli. They're sort of thought of as a Black Death or war metal band, and I guess I can see that because spiritually it's very satanic, and it has... but really in that, it just harkens back to the early 90s when the lines between these genres were a lot murkier. Right? So I think you emphasized in the review, this is a death metal band, and this is a death metal album. I liked that review. You guys did that one when I was out, and I went and listened to the record some and was really impressed. And I figured it was cool enough that I wanted to check it out again for year end. And I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. So it is my favorite guitar tone of any death metal record of the year.
Nice.
And it has, most if not all tracks have distinctive moments where you can be like, this is the track that does that. There's a ton of bespoke touches, this kind of just like this through line of musicianship and intensity, commitment to not just making the song, but really making the song and making it as over the top and crazy as possible. There's that just through line of true musicianship throughout it. So even from the first riff, right, they do this sort of chug riff, and they sickeningly slow it down in a way you can only do if you've been playing together for years, right? They do an actual tempo change within the first 30 seconds of the album, like within a riff or something.
Yeah.
There are moments where they'll like throw in a keypad that's like out of tune, and you'll just be like, "Damn, that's like sick." Like not just in the sense of like sick 360, but like that's disgusting, right?
Yeah.
It is very fully committed satanic death metal, and although, a lot of the death metal we both focused on this year is very, mid-tempo or slower and chug-heavy. I feel like this has some of the best chugs. They're just not throughout it, right? Some of the best chugs. It has some really good casting that's specifically death metal. I'd like to spend more time listening to this, to be honest.
Yeah. It's a completely excellent record. It narrowly didn't make my list just because there was a lot of stuff that I was listening to more. And I think it's a great record that I'm very glad you have on your list and would be perfectly at home in mine, probably at around a similar place. I think for me, I'm a little bit spoiled because I've known about Imprecation for a really long time. Yes. So it's like very familiar to me. But that doesn't take anything away from it. They're an outstanding band who are from the true old school of satanic death metal, and they do it in a way that is unlike their contemporaries because of all that extra, like, Texas death metal influence. You still feel the necrovore bleeding into this music. So, yeah, everything you said and more. Phenomenal record. Wholeheartedly recommend it. Even if it wasn't necessarily placed on my list, just imagine that it's there invisibly. So number 11 for me, one you've mentioned several times since we covered it, In the context of it belongs on a list, but I never want to listen to it again. So you immediately know what it is. Number 11 is Syphilic with And Justice for None.
Yes.
What a fucking album. When I bring a record like And Justice for None onto the show, I know that I'm holding the black metal guy hostage, but also in a way that he'll deeply respect. It's an excruciating listening experience. I was listening to it earlier today when I was doing some grocery shopping, and everything about this is engineered to be as viscerally unpleasant to the human ear as possible. The intensely sterile, cold production, the constant onslaught of just like puking guttural vocals, the seemingly random time and tempo changes, the fragmented, almost glitchy way that riffs are arranged, where a sequence of repetitions will end halfway through a riff that'll spin into a new one that repeats part of the riff before veering in another direction. It is extremity. Just bar none. And it's an outstanding record by a band that I've loved for a long time. And I think it's one of those instances where I really talk about it as sort of paradoxically atmospheric music. Syphilic has a very unified identity on every individual record. Here, you've got the sort of gruesome but like unquantifiable album art. You've got the samples about various, murders and human trafficking rings. And you've got the fact that it's so deeply centered on a location, this being Detroit, Michigan. It's really more than the sum of its parts. It's a very whole artistic statement, and this is one of those records that I think I use as justification for brutal death being very serious music within heavy metal that needs to be considered by more people.
Yeah, it was really impressive. It actually has a weird amount in common with my number 2 pick, and it's yeah, like I'll let you have the last word on this one. Any last like I don't know that I have anything to add above that, but I agree with everything you said. It should be on your list.
I appreciate that, and I think the way you talk about it in this sort of disgusted reverence is a very cool way to treat it.
All right, and speaking of disgusted reverence. We're at number 10, and you knew I had to do it to him. It is Rock's De Dud Rud.
Very nice, very nice.
A sort of a continuous apocalypse in goblin black metal form. This is another, like, this is the second full length in relatively recent years. I guess it's been 5 years since the last one. From Rock, who first existed as an obscene rumor in the late 90s on the Dutch black metal scene. Sort of infamous live shows, disgusting demos, and material that was refused from release because it was, quote, too extreme in the late 90s underground. This is music that will make you want to hop around your dungeon like a goblin. It's violent, malevolent, and the interesting thing is that although you might think of it as regressive or something, it is, I would say, quite forward-thinking. As, this is another sort of beyond black metal thing. It just deals directly with noise as a weapon in a way that a lot of maybe black metal sort of did incidentally as an important part of the early 90s BM, but it's been completely forgotten. And this does it directly, concertedly, intentionally. There's a strong resemblance to the best aspects of noise rock or garage punk or, the more muscular goth stuff. But I don't even know if there's a direct influence. I would think there is. a lot of the riffs or a lot of the most memorable ideas are based on strange shrieks or clangs. It's very dynamic, open, live playing. You can tell some riffs were written, but it was played in a really jammy way. And yet there's distinctive stuff that happens on every song. And instead of sounding like a lot of nowadays Raw Black does, it sounds like clattering and sort of like weak. Mm-hmm. This, maybe more than any other rock record, is just like sort of powerful. It's very physical, and it is I don't know, a fist in the face of nowadays trendies.
This is such a fun record. It's so absurdly fucking evil and like gleeful about it. It's fantastic. Everybody should listen to it. It's not on my list just because I don't know what kind of fucking mood I would have to be in to listen to it. Like I don't
Fair.
I think you've said before on a year-end show, I don't do hard drugs anymore. So it's like I don't know when I'm gonna listen to rock as a result. But yeah, it's just like obviously hilariously awesome. But I don't do hard drugs anymore. And I guess for me, I think that I get a lot of these kicks out of the sort of like the Portuguese takes on this sort of thing. Those align with my sort of like abruptum sensibilities a little bit more. But when you started comparing this to a lot of that like really ferocious noise rock stuff that you're into, it clicked together a little bit more. I think Morte and Candescente for me and this for you are like two sides of the same coin.
That makes a lot of sense. It's, basically, if you're a person who likes the idea of abruptum but wish it had more riffs,
yeah,
this is your baby, and you should also go back and listen to the demos, which have been re-released on Hayden's Heart, and which will make your friends question your sanity.
Very, very much so. Okay, so number 10 for me. Really no preamble needed. I am sure that it's on your list, probably higher. It's a great record. It's going to be on everyone's year-end list. It's Satanic Warmaster with Hammongander. It's a phenomenal record in a phenomenal discography. It was released very late this year, so I haven't had a ton of time with it to figure out like where it's ultimately going to sit in the discography. But I think it's basically as good as anything he's ever done, barring like Corellian for me. Extremely sophisticated, a brilliant. There's a lot of evidence for why he is an originator of this style. So many bands at this point have knocked off the Satanic Warmaster style, but when you hear Satanic Warmaster, it's so distinctly itself. Just because of subtleties in arrangement and the way melodies are organized that aren't replicable by other people with a less sophisticated ear than this guy. It's a phenomenal record. There's not really a ton to say about it. It's outstanding. Just wish it was longer. So, there you go.
We just fucking reviewed it also, right?
Yeah, we reviewed it last week, so...
Yeah, these hot takes are more valuable when we've had a little bit of time to reflect. But yeah, obviously that's going to be higher on my list. I'm glad you like it so much. I would agree it's, just it ranks with all of his other best stuff.
This is us fixing our mistake with Ruins, basically.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
It's like it doesn't even need to be listed, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we're not going to take it for granted. Yes. And and in this case, it's coming after a very long silence. So, so yeah, we'll talk about that more. Now on to 9. I think this is I guess a lot of the stuff that I've got on my top 10 is stuff, excepting maybe the 3... Well, yeah, all the stuff on my top 10, with one or two exceptions, is stuff with focus and searing intensity, and something that I think is highly original about it, and potentially generative. And so This is going to be higher on your list, I think. And I'm not sure where I put. Yeah, like this is going to be higher on your list. 9 for me is Galicia's Precipice. I think as an artistic achievement, this might rank higher. And as something that's personally exciting to me, as a revival of the Axis of Advanced Sacramentary Abolishment, Rites of the Gringalade, School of Death, Black Death, a school of noble war metal, this is, really an awesome musical event. And they're new out. We reviewed their EP earlier in the year. Obviously, like one of the dudes is a patron of the show, and this is out on Hessian Firm, who are our bros. So this is closely connected to the show, but we promise our judgment is not being addled by this.
Yeah. This record speaks for itself, I think.
It's I guess in some sense it's a cultural project we're invested in. It's like, yeah, we want people to listen to more stuff that sounds like this. They have basically, at this point, this could be a hidden. I said on their initial review, this could be an obscure rehearsal tape from between Sacramentary and Axis. And if one or two eccentricities aside, I would have completely believed that.
Oh yeah.
It's so as a band that is trying to master possibly one of the most difficult styles to play in extreme metal, it's extremely impressive that they've done it to this extent. And done it in an unstinting way, because there's also the fully, thoroughly interwoven sci-fi concept stuff, which has something to do with the way the riffs are sequenced, the songs. We talked about it in depth on the review, but there's a really sophisticated timing and architecture, both to where the gigantic barbarian riffs erupt, and to the interstitial riffing where that seems to be just random or, quote, chaotic. Those places are very carefully organized and directed. Limitations for me. I think that I think that basically, like, the masterpiece is the next record or the one after. It's just, and I want him to keep pushing. But I think the things that are limitations for me would be, like, the production. It's produced more like a Raw Black record. And although it helps set it apart from the influences a bit, I think it doesn't do justice to the muscular death metal and thrash core that's supposed to be in this music. I'd like to hear a little more. I said I sound like the guitar tone was spread out, kind of, and the vocals. We love the vocals. Everyone in the band is doing a vocal always. There's the lyrics. They have different parts of the lyrics, but you're clearly just allowed to scream whenever you want.
Yeah.
And awesome rule. It seems like it may have been played live. They can't have played the whole thing through in one take. But
yeah, because actually, speaking to the drummer, he corrected us. Apparently, it was just 2 guys. On the record, the bassist had left a while back, so just a correction there. This is a duo putting this record out.
Yeah. It sounds like it's played by a full band. Ripping live performance, which is really important and something more bands should get back to. Lots of spontaneity and inflection in the playing. So tons of stuff I like, but yeah, production holds it back a little for me. The vocal, and I was going to say the vocals also have this diffuse, sort of highly distorted, reverbed quality that I think detracts from some of the immediate aggression that's central for this stuff. And if I had to really think about other things that would be limitations for me, although there's been a lot of attention to it, you can still distinguish between the big riffs and the interstitial riffing. And there's such a marked difference when you get even to builds or preparatory parts for the big riffs. It's just night and day relative to the other stuff, and you can just tell which is more important. I almost wonder if they played fewer riffs during those during those other parts. I'm not sure there's anything about the riffs themselves that needs to be changed. Maybe just commit to 2 of them instead of 5 of them.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's a fair argument to make. I think that I like the sort of chaotic execution, but that's just a difference in taste because I like a lot of spazzy tech death stuff. I will be talking about this one at length a little bit later.
Awesome.
So, number 9. One that a lot of listeners might have forgotten about, but we said when we covered it that it's like just definitely year-end material. And I think it's the best just straight up down the line black metal record of the year. And I just didn't expect to like it as much as I did, but it's kind of a minor masterpiece if you're really invested in black metal as a style, and especially in how you play it. And this is Corpus Christi with The Bitter End of Old. This is just a remarkably sophisticated black metal record from kind of a weird part of the year. I think it was like April, May that this came out, something like that. Yeah. Corpus Christi, for those who don't know, longtime stalwarts of the Portuguese black metal scene, but they've always played a more directly sort of second wave inspired variety of black metal rather than the kind of clanging dungeony stuff you might associate with the Portuguese sound. We talked on the show at length about how this is a record for people who have been listening to, and I think in a lot of cases playing, black metal for a ton of years. All the things that set Corpus Christi on this record apart from others are subtleties of riffing and black metal songwriting that take a long time to sink in. This is a record that is full of surprises that don't sound like surprises. Deliberately more difficult choices taken when it comes to songwriting, as well as just an incredibly broad spectrum and historical look at sort of all the lessons learned from black metal prior to the moment of its release. There's moments on it that sound like 87, and there's moments that sound like 2030. Just immensely sophisticated, beautifully well-rounded black metal record. Zero flash to it, zero excess, just cold, steely, and excellent.
Well, I'm glad that's on here. I debated whether to put that on my list, and I hadn't gone back to it, and I guess I didn't have time to go back to it again. If there's a reason it's not, maybe it was just the kind of it felt self-contained. But that's not what I thought about it at the time. As you say, there's a lot about it that's very forward-thinking. And not just in the sense of the polish. Another thing that I think might make me listen to it less, but that I think I really respect about it, is that it embraces this very of-the-moment... Or I guess I remember saying this. It was like of the moment of 2012, extremely polished modern black metal production, and also certain stuff in the guitars that's like very orthodox and are very Migla, right? And it engages tropes of Migla style stadium black metal in a way that is, they pull it off. They do it without anything ostentatious or poppy or pretentious about it. And the versions of these riffs they have are fiercely economical and really memorable. I think that album could have been on my year-end list, and I'm glad you put it there, and I'm going to have to go re-listen to it.
Yeah, I'm almost surprised that it didn't make it on yours. But no, yeah, really good record. And I think I emphasized in the review, but I want to say again, if you're a guitarist who plays black metal, this is like a clinic in how to revive old riff forms from the second wave that a lot of us have probably dismissed. This is how they pull it off.
Oh, and there are breakdowns.
Yeah, there's huge fucking breakdowns.
Okay, so now we get to the part of my list that's just all black metal. And this is the black metal I really like from this year, right? I've just got a chunk. I tried to move them apart, but I think they make more sense as a chunk.
Okay.
It's going to be, they're all recent releases. I'm going to have a hard time ranking them until next year. So, at number 8, And maybe we could also call it post-black metal. At number 8, it's Martyr by Furton.
I just couldn't find a space for it on my list, but that's an outstanding record.
Well, this is another band that, like Corpus Christi, that really skillfully draws on the most crisp modern black metal production and riffing ideas that come from Migla and probably just like prog metalcore and stuff, and yet does it in a total package that is unmistakably black metal and disciplined and ambitious rather than pretentious. Although it has these kinds of modern bells and whistles which are interesting, the spiritual essence of the music is foresty, romantic, aristocratic German black metal in the tradition of the Wad Van Circle. And there's, one thing that really distinguishes a great record is if it sends you back to things you should have listened to more. And this sent me digging back to every single Nagelfar record in great detail, which I had not, I'd only really listened deliberately with focus to one or two of them at that point. I don't know, what could you say? That's sort of swirling autumnal energy, but in this kind of ecstatic and positive way. And tracks, there's an embarrassment of riches from riff to riff. You'll hear new things stuffed in each track every time you go back to it. There's tracks that are very convincingly sprawling and atmospheric and more down-tempo, like big ringing arpeggios, and it works because it's more like Ruins of Beverast or Dead Can Dance or any kind of like more non-black metal atmospheric stuff. And there's an understated folkiness throughout that's coming from this band's past as being more of like a black folk Viking band. All in all, just really cool, great album cover, and this is sort of it's ambitious, it's very true, and it's got a lot of heart.
Yeah. Totally excellent record. Absolutely could have found a place in my top 20. I think the only reason it's not there is just because it's an extremely heady listen. It takes a lot of attention and a lot of energy. And there's just a lot of stuff I would listen to first that's, a little bit more digestible. But if you take the time and you sit down and you really study it in the manner that you would a Ruins of Beverast record, it's absolutely phenomenal. Everybody should listen to it. Number 8 for me. I think this is the first time I've ever done this on the show. I got to cheat a little bit, and I got 2 bands for the price of 1.
Oh, no!
Grave Upheaval and the Funeral Orchestra with In Existentia.
Well, at least you've got a good excuse for it.
What do you mean?
2 bands at once.
Oh, yeah.
No, you've because it's a split.
Yeah. No, I wasn't gonna do the double number 8 thing. No, fuck that. Give me more credit. No, it's so In Existentia is a split between Grave Upheaval and the Funeral Orchestra, 2 bands that I've loved for a long time, and the way this record comes off really feels almost more like a collaboration than it does a traditional split. There's a real unity of atmosphere and aesthetic vision. Each band is kind of playing off their own side of that aesthetic, but stylistically each is leaning into the other in a really cool way. I love when splits work like this, where there's a sort of continuous narrative throughout the entire thing, and the bands really work together to make that happen. And on top of that, it's essentially a Torture Doom release in 2022, which is so rare to find. It sort of immediately rockets into, a major place on my year-end list. It's sick, it's evil, it's slow, it's atmospheric, it sends you to hell, and it fucking rules, man.
Yeah, so this is one of those ones, I'm not surprised this is on your list. This is This is one of those where I'm like, yeah, I respect this, and because it does what it does so well, it is basically unlistenable for me.
Oh yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's but what I think anything I can add, I might have said this on the review, but I feel like something that's this kind of music lends itself to the split format because you just get this natural because it's very deliberately monochrome and slow. The dramatic shift in timbre halfway through the record is a cool effect. And if you make that a feature rather than an incidental aspect of it, if you build something around that, it's really cool. Yeah, I mean it's a masterful album. It shows a lot of patience and restraint, and it's got me interested in checking out more of these guys' stuff because it sounds like they have like kind of three kind of related bands. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad it's on your list, dude.
Yeah, I figured this is one where it's like you couldn't in good conscience put it on yours, so I'm gonna make sure it's on mine.
Yeah. So, next up, speaking also of extremely ambitious Germanic black metal, that is kind of a real sit down and listen thing. This is Ataigar's Tyrannamord. I suppose Ataigar are Swiss, of course, but German Swiss, and this deals with the lore of the Holy Roman Empire. Where to place this relative to Furtan was a struggle. In some sense, the Furtan is the more generative and forward-looking one. This seems kind of like a self-contained masterpiece. But I just put it ahead of it for now because it's a there's this mastery of long form structure on this record. It is it's a narrative about the murder of an emperor, and it's a lengthy record in a time when that's rare. Each song has unique events, and there are maybe like there's a distinct midpoint climax and a distinct ending climax. There are tons of thematically related riffs, some neat variations in tempo. Ataigar also, it's really cool hearing, I think there's a thing happening in that younger dudes are taking the Wad Van bands as a touchstone, so it's cool hearing kind of Naglfar and Ruins of Beveras type stuff in this. At its core, Ataigar is really influenced by Kvist, and that's awesome to hear as well. And there are rumors that there's actually a new Kvist record coming. Did you hear this?
I think we had talked about that. Yeah.
I mean, who knows? There's been a new Dawn record coming for 20 years, so we'll see. But it's one really cool thing a record can do is revive the reputation of a band that should be canonical. And yeah, I guess it's very ambitious. You can take in the whole thing while you're sitting in your armchair with your glass of evil scotch, but it also works very well as atmospheric music. In that sense, it's adapted to 2022 sensibilities. Very sort of continuous, immersive atmosphere, and in the climax, there's a sense of it treats violence a bit differently than most black metal records, and there's this sense of a true kind of mortality or fatality to it in the last kind of in the climax. I remember talking about how it just sounds like a guy getting stabbed and the air going out of him. Instead of just celebrating triumphant onslaught and furious melee, right? It has to do with a life and it's being extinguished, and it's a kind of I don't know, it's a different take on it.
I get what you mean. You make a really good case for the record. I think this is like, I think there's one every year. This is like an on-nose situation where this one just didn't really grab me that much. And I think that's just like, it's just operating in a certain style that's never appealed to me that much. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's like, it's a very obviously excellent execution of that style. It definitely has a distinct atmosphere. It has, it's rooted in really interesting styles and an interesting period of black metal from kind of the late 90s to the late 2000s that you don't hear very much anymore. So I would say people can basically not pay attention to my opinions on this. Just listen to what the black metal guy has to say about it. And I think he's going to steer you in the right direction. It's just aesthetically just doesn't really spark something for me.
I think the reason I placed it ahead of the Fur10 is it just has a although yeah, I could go either way on that. I'm not sure, but one reason it's so high on the list is it's a very complete statement. It feels like a masterwork and like they've been working at it a long time, and they didn't spare anything and they brought it all together. There's nothing top heavy about it, so.
Yeah, it's very solid and it's very sophisticated work. So number 7 for me, you'll have to remind me where you place this one, but we're finally getting back to it. It is Corpsest, Succumb to Rot. There were 2 giant Finnish death metal records released this year. The other one I will talk about a little bit later. Yeah, you already know. This is just a sort of peak level genre exercise, I guess, in terms of old school Finnish death metal. This is like you wouldn't change a single note on it. It has everything that I want in bands that are trying to do an old school style of of death metal. You know, a real emphasis on heaviness, paying attention to blast beats, caring about them, sequencing riffs in a narrative form that still leaves room for just the sort of like mosh moments and, pit riffs and stuff like that. This is just the total package of an old school death metal record for me. I mean, like, I would kind of weirdly compare it to something like 200 Stab Wounds, which is a band with a Slave to the Scalpel last year, which is a band doing sort of a generally older style of death metal, but bringing so much polish and so much current songwriting knowledge to it, it like revives it instantly.
Yeah, I'm glad this is higher for you. This was 14 for me.
Okay,
I guess I've said my piece about it already.
Yeah, I think that's just an all-rounder that pretty much anyone who listens to the show will get a lot out of.
Absolutely. So, number 6. This is, again, whether in some sense this is a much more restricted, limited, and I suppose, less ambitious record than the last 2, than the Fur10 and the Ataigar, but is drawing on a very similar well of influences. And I'm going to put it at the head of the list just because what black metal has been missing is aggression. And on Magdan's Evangelium, Gregorian bring a lot of aggression. So
okay,
that's my 6. I believe I did that one with
you did that one with Hyper Shaman, yep.
So I doubt you've heard this one, really.
I've heard parts of it, but it definitely wasn't, like, aesthetically my thing. It's definitely a U record.
Yeah, so basically, if you like the idea of the majestic, authentically neoclassical riffing of Kvist, or the elaborate symphonic epics of Cetherial, and you want them to feel like Panzer Division Marduk, this is the record for you. This is Gregorian has a real mastery of the peak of noble black metal guitar technique from the late 90s, from the Swedish and Norse scene. A lot of direct classical influence. I talked with the guy, like, you know, that it was basically just like, yeah, he likes Marduk and Triumphator and Cythereal and classical music, you know. It has something also, it's not, although it's very much just like riff, 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 it is not a riff slideshow, in part because there's an excellent drumming performance. I think he did everything. I can't remember. Is it a one or a two person? The drums are awesome, and they don't sound programmed to me. Wait, never
three
mind.
guys.
Never mind. Fuck. Okay, so this is good. We cleared that up. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so because this has full band energy. For some reason, I was remembering it as a one-man thing. It's got one guy doing the guitars and bass, but it also has a vocalist and a drummer. Every part of the formula is turned up to 11. Everyone is allowed free reign. And I was listening to it again today, and I realized if I were to sell it to you, I'd tell you that the drummer, the drummer sounds like Morbid Angel drumming.
Okay.
He marks off the ends of phrases, and there's a lot of really cool rhythmic stuff happening with the length of the riffs and with the interaction of the guitar and drums. It could be very static and loud music, but it's extremely dynamic. If there's a flaw to it, I would say it maybe has, the concept comes unhinged from the music a bit. It has this elaborate, this has a commendable ambition in the concept. It's this sort of like Goethean opera, or, you know, oratorio, in which different voices, like humans, archangels, whatever, are like debating the future of the cosmos. And then, I don't know, the chaos witch comes in at the end and flips the cable over and says, "You're all wrong." It doesn't detract from the record. The brief clips of scary voices talking are kind of cool and have a bit of that early 90s weirdness to it. But I can't help but think those parts would be better used with maybe some kind of just variation in the instrumentals. I understand the idea that you want the music to just be relentless, but it also needs a bit of punctuation. Why not just have some cool textural stuff in there? Like, this guy's perfectly capable of writing it.
Yeah, it's sort of a Funeral Mist idea.
Yeah, and as far as the concept, I guess if I could read Danish, it might help. But but like, I get the idea that, like, if instead of the elaborate debate or dialogue thing, why not just have the whole thing be the Chaos Witch screaming?
I gotcha. I'll go back and check that one again. I just listened to some pieces just to, like, roughly familiarize myself. It didn't, like, grab me, but I think it sounds like what you're pointing to is, like, longer form structural stuff that would probably come out on a deeper listen. So I'll go back and give that one a shot, especially when it's this high up for you. So, but probably this is a good moment, because this is one you probably haven't listened to in full. This is the last one that comes from an episode where it was me and Hyper Shaman, so you probably already know what it is. This is a hat trick. All three releases by this project have been featured on the show. It's gotten better every time, and this is the one where it's arrived. It's the best brutal death metal record of the year. It is Anal Stab Wound with Reality Drips into the Mouth of Indifference. It's absolutely immense. Everything that Nikhil was working toward from the beginning of this project, he has arrived at. This is essentially a more organized and songy counterpoint to The Sanguinary Impetus by Defeated Sanity. Nikhil's performance is basically at the same level of playing in Defeated Sanity, and he's handling all instruments. Probably, me and Hyper Shaman did a pretty good review of this one. I liked what we talked about. And I guess the big thing that I want to draw attention to is, despite how blisteringly fucking chaotic and technical this record is, it's immensely well paced. All the songs have very distinct identities, and Nikhil's writing, his sort of like motivic brutal death structuring, is great at sort of guiding the listener and signposting moments for them. So it becomes much easier to parse if you're not super familiar with the style. So it's not only one of the most technical, probably the most technical thing released this year, it's also disarmingly approachable. And I think that if he's able to do that at the age he is now, he's basically cemented himself to be like one of the most important metal musicians probably within the next 10 years in terms of driving the style forward.
Yeah, well, so maybe this actually kind of parallels the Gregorian well, because Anal Stab Wound is one of those things that while I've very much appreciated the artistry in it, it's like not just the textures in it, our melodic ideas have not been my thing exactly. There's like more monged brutal death that I like better, or like or even the syphilic in some sense left this big impression on me, even though I never want to hear it again. But I feel like based on how you're describing it, I should really listen to this one, because it sounds like this might give me a clearer look at all the strengths of the project as they've emerged. Right?
Oh yeah,
if you're comparing it to the latest, the Sanguinary Impulse or whatever, Sanguinary Impetus, then like I'd probably like it.
I think that you would get a lot out of this one. This is probably the death metal, brutal death sleeper hit for like the Discord crew and Terminus listeners. And of course, in the brutal death metal scene itself, it's already basically a classic. So yeah, I think even as sort of an outsider to the style, you would get a ton out of this one.
All right. Down to the top 5. Okay, and now I'm actually wondering if this is on your list. I'm guessing maybe not. But I figure, I figure we got to represent the outlaw rock sound. This is Execution of Spirit by Ink and Fire.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that one didn't make my list, but it is a very, very good record.
Well, I think it was maybe a little bit too gorked for you. At least, maybe there are ways you appreciate gorked, but the guitar tone wasn't quite your thing.
It was that, and it felt like a little bit uneven from track to track. It was like, I think I really, really enjoyed about 2/3 of the material, and then about 1/3 of it I wasn't really into.
I think there are limitations to it, and I can discuss those. And I mean, yeah, like, is the execution any better than any of the last 3 records I just mentioned? No, not really. But it's sort of at the cutting edge of this new way, of this emerging style, and it's doing it in a very cool way that's resistant to new trends. USBM is very often thinks it's being triumphant, but is actually degenerating into flowery melodic goofiness. And this is not. Ink and Fire completely refuses that path. This of course has some very cool melodic work on it, but it is quite stripped down relative to MK's work in Finn. And it is extremely noisy, although not necessarily in the way you'd expect, because it has this blown-out reverb production. As you said, it sounds like it's recorded in a wind tunnel, and I was like, that's why it's great. Now, could the guitar tone be tweaked and played with and given a little more body and maybe could it have everything I like about it and be less annoying to you? Yeah, probably. That's stuff to tweak in future, with studio stuff. But, generally, this is just it's very inventive on a melodic level. It solves the problem of how do you write a record basically of predominantly major key black metal without it being a gimmick. It's sort of more, pentatonic and minor colored major key. It's a powerful, folky major key in the spirit of, bluegrass and country and stuff like that. it very often, some of the melodies in here sound like they could have just been written by settlers in 1875. Like it's, or 1700. It feels very old and very new, which is the black metal thing. Although this is not really black metal, it's outlaw rock. It's something new. And as far as bands who are driving beyond the confines of black metal and not really sort of clinging to the idea that they need to be black metal, Ink and Fire is at the top of that game and producing something new. And it's also very aggressive, very ripping. Limitations, aside from the production, which can be debated, I would say maybe I pretty like I get what you mean. Some songs are better than others, but I feel like every song has something distinctive, and for a record that is as deliberately monochrome as this is in some ways, like they're all just fast with a bunch of they're all just fast and riffy with the same guitar tone. It really doesn't get old, which was astonishing to me. And he's still pulling out some of his best stuff at the very end. But as far as limitations, it would be maybe the drums. It's got programmed drums, and so it invariably hews a little towards riff slideshow. The thing that keeps it from being that is the tremendous energy in the guitar playing and the vocals. But there's not much to say about the drumming, and although I know the idea is that this is a sort of project he can, a project he can do, just take with him, do on his own terms. One does wonder, wouldn't this be even cooler with drums? And I'm pretty sure MK can play drums, or has some experience doing it. So I think on the next one, I'd like to hear him go full Varg.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah, I think that would probably be an asset, having live drums on that, because it's such kind of virile, alive music.
Yes.
Yeah, it feels like it kind of wants a human drummer. Very good record. I think there's just, you like it more completely than I do. There's certain songs that just don't really connect with me for some reason, but I think this is definitely this is like Galicia was for you. The masterpiece is the one after this, or maybe 2 albums from now. That's how I'm feeling about the Ink and Fire record. But that's become a big sleeper hit for listeners of the show, and a lot of people on the Discord are really into that one, so I'm totally fine with having it that high on your list.
All right, yeah. I mean, anything else about it? I could see, like, there's some question as to whether I'll be listening to it a lot in the future, but that's just because, like, my thing, I don't know, I'll probably be listening to, like, storming Teutonic black metal from the 90s, right? or shit that sounds like it, like the last 3 bands, or, different kinds of gorked pagan stuff. But just as something in this new American style, I find this incredibly fresh and well done, and just, invigorating.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a slam dunk for outlaw rock. Okay, so number 5 for me. Again, I'll skip most of the preamble here since you've already spoken about it. Number 5 is going to be Grand Belial's Key with Kohanic Charmers.
Nice.
Anybody that's listened to it basically knows the story. This has been a surprisingly kind of divisive record amongst the fan base, which surprised me a little bit. And I think that the reason for that is this wasn't a big comeback record. This was just the next Grand Belial's Key record. And I think a lot of people were expecting like a bigger statement just because of how long it had been, but no, they plugged away with something that feels perfectly contiguous with the rest of the discography. However, when it's Grand Belial's Key doing it, perfectly contiguous with the rest of the discography is better than almost everything. I know that you've got some taste differences, particularly when it comes to like the most long-haired kind of stuff, but me just really enjoying the weirder aspects of GBK, like the sort of prog rock flair to it. This album's just a joy to listen to. And honestly, I think I like it even more for how sort of understated and workmanlike it is. I think it would have been easy for GBK to do some big sort of like very distinct songs in the way they did on Kosherat, and probably get a bigger response from the audience. But they didn't do that. They elected to go more of the Judeo Beast assassination route and just do straightforward but very sophisticated USBM songs. And I really like that. This has entered regular rotation. Galal as a guitarist is phenomenal as always. He has a unique riffing style that basically everyone in USBM now imitates, but almost nobody can replicate. If you like the rest of GBK, you will like this record just as much. And for a band with the status that they do, that's the biggest recommendation I could offer.
So I've already said my piece about it. The last thing I would say is it's sort of fitting that it's on your number 5 across from Ink and Fire, because it's kind of full circle, right? Because GBK in some sense is the original outlaw rock.
Yeah. That is cool. Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit on the show, that as being like germinal to the whole USBM style as a whole.
Yeah. All right, so number 4. This is one that I didn't really go back to, but that just speaks for itself with a chthonic bellow. This is Slugathor's Crypt of the Ancient Fire.
Fuck yeah.
So, as I said, I wanted the stuff on my top 10 to, for the most part, be just like laser-focused, ripping, and high intensity. Stuff that's like intense and maybe like really aggressive. This is that, but slow, right? It's that, but like just pummeling lower mid tempo the whole way, with some unusual eruptions of kind of intricate thrashy trem riffs. Some of which work, a lot of which work in the sort of rolling groove bolt thrower way, but some are actually blasted. Slugathor is barbarian death metal. It sounds primordial and pagan without really having any direct gestures towards black metal. And in that sense, it is very Findeath. Even though this is pretty much entirely power chords and a few leads, it still has the sort of dark atmosphere that and severity that a lot of the Finnish death metal stuff is known for. That it can do that without any of the frills is very cool. So definitely, like, if you like brain dead, bludgeoning, pagan black metal, this is also death metal for you. And luckily, I am also a huge fan of Bolt Thrower and things like that, right? So this is, although ironically, Bolt Thrower comes from Amoebics, etc., etc. So this is just like, it's very earthy. It's it either does or probably not draws on, but just does things we love in beatdown hardcore. And the great thing is that you don't have to be listening to beatdown hardcore. Like just crushing downbeat riffs that are very unusual in sort of true or old school death metal. The level of minimalism and muscularity is just matched only by like Ride for Revenge at their most driving. It's really cool. If I have any limitation about it, for me, it's the guitar tone. I've realized I think I like, at least with extreme guitar tones, I like extreme guitar tones that are a little crisper than you. Mm-hmm. I think you like extreme guitar tones that are more like, say, a bludgeoning woomph.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, I prefer the tone on the Imprecation record. Mm-hmm. I think if you played Slugathor a little crisper, I would like it even more. But I think that's a me thing. And it's also just that, like, I haven't been... I haven't been in the mood to really slug out this year.
It's very flabby in a deliberate way, yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of this flabby woomph guitar tone, and like I think I'll probably come back to this when I'm really ready to slug.
All bow down to the Slugathron, and yes, I'll be talking about it shortly. Number 4 for me. This is going to be one where it's like it's going to be an ink and fire situation where it's very high on one list, it's absent on the other, and you'll be happy that I included it. It is probably the weirdest single record of the year. And I am so goddamn excited about this band in general and where they're going to go from here, especially now that they've all finished high school. This is Astral Tomb with Soul Gazer.
Yes.
What a fucking record, man. What a just brain melting mind fuck of an album. Pretty much all of my top 5 could be number 1. I basically just ordered it and like, what am I listening to the most? Got to number 1. So Soul Gazer's gotten a ton of plays for me.
Oh, cool.
If this was really early in the year that this was released, but it was just always at the forefront of my mind to be way up there on the list. For those of you that didn't hear, Astral Tomb does spacey, sort of psychedelic touched death metal, but with a really oppressive, minimal, ugly atmosphere with elements of brutal death tossed into it. It's got some of that spacey or Lovecraftian vibe, but in a much earthier, weirder, more primitive sense. It's high art and low art colliding at the speed of fucking light. It's got the most abstract slam riffing and the coolest spacey leads ever on the same record. There's really nobody like these guys. They're getting comparisons to stuff like Blood Incantation. They sound nothing like that whatsoever. These guys are completely unique unto themselves, and I think this is the band. All those people that are really into Demi-Lich and Time Ghoul and stuff, Astral Tomb are like the great hope for that style going forward. And I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, I'm glad this is on here. I considered it, but I decided it wouldn't be earnest enough to what I like to listen to.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. I think their last one was closer to my listening habits because it was like noise death and sounded more hardcore-y. And there was a lot more focus on these just sort of like wonked out noise riffs. This one, yeah, it has more slam and it has more spacey stuff. And so it's just not as much my particular palette. But it's awesome. I think a thing you could add about it is that although we've talked about just regular death metal has been wiping the floor with regular black metal this year, and that it's black metal that kind of might need to sort of shed its carapace and transform. This is a death metal band that really sounds like it's pointing beyond death metal.
Yeah.
I don't think like calling this a death metal record almost is misleading. It's some kind of very heavy mid-tempo rhythmic music. It's almost like it's some sort of successor to Meshuggah, but as like real avant-garde extreme music. Right?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It really isn't. It's for weird death metal people, but it's not really a death metal record anymore.
Yeah, weird death metal people are the only people who are going to listen to it, but it's after something else, and it's yeah, you know how with Meshuggah there's that thing where like it's like it's not quite an extreme music band, you know, because of the vocals and the the mass appeal. This is just totally extreme music.
Yeah, this is
consummately.
This is my version of like hyper gorked. This is my rock, I guess.
This is stoner rock.
It kind of is, yeah.
Oh, but yeah, I see what you mean. I thought you were saying rock and roll, but
no, like rock the band.
No, I get it. Yes, it's also like rock the band. Yes,
it's also this is. Did you invent the term dark side weed energy for this band?
Yeah, pretty much exactly. So
they're at the top of the throne. Yeah.
Astral Tomb dudes, if you're listening to this, check out Rock, WROK, from the Netherlands. They sound nothing like you and everything like you.
Also, please print Dark Side Weed Energy shirts.
Long sleeve.
Yes.
All right. Number 3 could be number 2, but for technical reasons is not, just because because I want to save the space for newer bands. But Satanic War Master, Amon Gander.
Yep.
It's there was so much pressure on this guy for a comeback, and he stuck the landing and then some, and he did it without pandering. This is Satanic War Master's most complete and many-sided feeling record, and yet also his most fiercely disciplined. And although it's extremely well produced, the thing that carries it is that it has the same single-minded intensity and aggression that's throughout my top 10. And it is his most sort of, in some ways, his most trance-like, most, in some sense, Satanic War Master wrote the Hate Forest record I liked this year. It's, you know, it has a, we just reviewed it there, so I'm not going to talk about it too much more. It came out, you know, we did the review last week. It's phenomenal. Strongly recommend listening. Draws on all the strengths of, as you said, strength and honor, but in a way that incorporates everything he's learned since. I guess the broader thing I could say, right? You can take this as time for like the pan out. I think people might have for a long time. There was a thing I've heard. People have talked about Satanic War Master as the sort of the ultimate fan black metal band. That is, that he grew up on this stuff, right? The original Norse and Swedish bands didn't grow up on it because they invented it, right? And even the bands that influenced them, they were kind of growing up with and like corresponding with, right? You know, they're like pen paling Sarcophago or whatever. At this point, you know, Werewolf has, you know, he'd played in Horna, I think, early on and stuff like that, but he was sort of already, the scene already had its mythos. He was steeped in the lore of the scene, and it had really distilled this sense of what its iconography and spirit was. And by the early 2000s, right, there was also already the concern that some were turning from the path and becoming false, right?
Yeah.
So this was a concerted return to origins. And whereas the dudes at the origins were often a lot of the sort of a lot of the kind of mythology or the persona and some of the central themes were more implied than directly stated. Like, remember when we went back to In the Nightside Eclipse and realized the word Satan is in the lyrics once?
Yeah.
Or Lucifer, right? It's what it is, of course, is it's all over the art. It's everywhere in the presentation. It's suffusing the music, right? They're not saying it, right? They don't need to say it. Same with like what their persona is. What are these guys? Well, they're sort of like, you know, cruel vampiric knights, but also werewolves. And they like dominating the peasantry, dethroning God, and swiving succubi, right? But all of that was sort of more implicit, and the lyrics were often kind of abstract and poetic, sometimes more successfully than others. Satanic War Master is like, I am a werewolf. I am also a vampire. I swive succubi. I am the tyrant. Satan, Satan, Satan. Right? And that was a really central part of it, because he was just a diehard fan. And compared to some of those bands, right, he had relatively limited technical ability. Although I think looking back on it now, I think we can appreciate that there was always a lot of musicianship to it. Especially by the time you get to Hope for Blood.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it was more rough-hewn, more built around sequence of riffs rather than the total package. The drumming wasn't as important to presence. Things like that, right? I think he really decided, I don't want to be the world's best, you know, the world's best fan black metal band. I don't want to be the world's best underground or cult black metal band. I want to just be like the world's best black metal band. And with Fimbulvinter, he spread his leathery wings and tried to master more breadth of that sound. And he's gone away and been questing in the depths, and he's come back with this, which really shows that Satanic War Master can now stand on the level with the bands that inspired it.
Yeah. I talked about it already. Phenomenal record. I've never heard that idea before about it being fan black metal, but that's interesting, and I get it, and I think that's kind of a cool thing to be at the same time. You know, it's like there's something very earnest and authentic about that, because I like, you know, I'll be gay. It's like, I like being a metalhead. I think it's cool. It's like, I think it's a cool thing to be. And I think that it's really cool that a guy with that sort of just like, it feels like Werewolf still hears black metal the way all of us did when we were 17. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's applied that to his music, and that's kept it so rich and so alive throughout his entire career.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. And, yeah, and I mean, the other thing to remember is that basically all bands post-2000s are fan black metal bands, right?
Yeah, by definition, yeah.
And that I think this is a very... And I think this was a move to get beyond that, and it succeeds completely. But yeah, as you say, without losing the fact that he is just absolutely as stoked about this stuff as he was on day one.
Absolutely. All right, number 3 for me, which I'm pretty sure is going to be number 2 for you, now that I know how everything's shaking out. This is a band that you first championed on the show. Just sort of like talking about them in passing, but with reverence. And then you showed them to me. I got really into them. Then finally, after a lot of years, they came out with a full-length record that sounds very different from their old material and is even better. And one of the... it's interesting to say that, like, one of the best death metal records of the year, or probably of the past few years, came out of fucking India. And that is Aparthiva Raktadhara with Adyapeeth Maranasamhita. Extraordinary record. Reverent of classic stuff, but driven to such a point of extremity it feels completely new. Old school in timbres and in sort of in execution, but very modern in songwriting and these sort of like paralyzing vertical constructions. It has all the things that I like about old school death metal, especially Morbid Angel, which is very clearly the primary influence here. In terms of like its really bizarre melodic sensibility and its intensity. And then it has a lot of things that I appreciate from like modern brutal death metal, which is an emphasis on speed and blast beats and deliberately difficult, you know, almost atonal sort of guitar arrangements. I love how darkly atmospheric this is by, again, going in kind of a dry, sterile territory and having no atmosphere. There's a version of this album that has a lot more reverb and some backing keyboards, and it's not half as good as this album is. This is so stark and alien and weird. I would compare this pretty directly to some of the really alienating Disodeath stuff, like the Ad Nauseam record from last year, just executed in a completely different way. It's this is a revelation, and immediately these guys are at the top of the Indian subcontinent for extreme metal. I don't think there's any contest.
Yeah, and my number 2 is Aparthiva Raktadhara. Adyapeeth Maranasamhita. And yeah, so I guess we'll just continue the conversation. You've captured it really well. I think this is emblematic of how death metal has been kicking black metal's ass this year. And, you know, there was a thought I opened earlier and then sort of shut. But I think if everything becoming like black metal had a positive effect in any way for other genres, it's that a certain kind of death metal guy started playing death metal with the spiritual or ideological seriousness of black metal. You know, started playing it as militant anti-modern music rather than just really heavy riffs.
Yeah.
And started playing something that, you do black metal things with death metal framework, like the dark metal bands on Hessian Firm. Aparthiva does that to a T. This band practices a coldness, a severity, a discipline, and intolerance that was supposed to be fundamental to black metal. It's hard to think of any album. This album makes you think of somebody just getting up and doing 1,000 push-ups. Or like standing on, like doing some crazy, crazy sort of, guru-like calisthenics, bizarre left-hand yoga. It's extremely demanding music, and strangely meditative. The rhythmic work on this record is fantastic. It opens. We've talked all year and somewhat last year about black metal bands carving out new rhythmic space as a way of shaping different kinds of melodies. And sometimes that's just as adding extras on to existing ways of making melodies. This is, here they're using Indian polyrhythm to blow the rhythmic field open and create completely new kinds of melodies. If it has anything in common with other stuff, it's, as you say, Brutal Death, and I would say the Syphilic record.
Yeah, I can see that.
There are phrases on here that are, and the other important thing is that the odd time stuff it never feels off kilter or spazzy. The 11-4 phrase will loop 4 times, and you can just headbang it and then speed into like a thrash beat.
Yeah.
It's not showy. It's not an everyday listen because it's so Spartan. But it is. I feel like now that I have a little more time on my plate, I'll be going back to it a lot. And I mean, like the best art, this is inspiring stuff.
Oh yeah, well, this is. I use this a lot when I talk about like favorite records whenever we do these episodes. This again makes you feel like when you first discovered death metal, when you were a teenager. The sheer stark unapproachability of it still blows my mind, like 20 years after I started listening to this kind of music. It's a fucking... It is like Brutal Death again in that it is like a granite block. It's music of mass and substance. It's just it's fucking, and it's insanely brutal too.
It's what is it that it's the Trey Azagtote quote where he's like, "When I play guitar, I want other people to quit."
Yeah, and this makes everybody want to quit. Okay, so number 2, everybody's probably figured it out. You covered it already just a couple slots ago, and you were correct in all your assessments. It is a Slugathor with Crypt of the Ancient Fire. This was in first place for a lot of the year until one snuck up on it. Sometimes I like to think about the idea of like, can you have a perfect record that isn't necessarily your favorite record of all time? And I think you can. I think I know a lot of perfect records. This is a perfect record. This could end up in like constant rotation for the rest of my life kind of album. But it's just, there's not a single note you would want to change off this. This is just a perfect execution of a single idea done so effectively that it becomes high art, basically. It's a commissioned painting in a church that we remember hundreds of years later. It's staggeringly heavy. It is convincingly the successor to Ripikolu. It's emblematic of all my favorite things about the Finnish death metal style, the adherence to bolt thrower, the emphasis on like primitive but still alienating groove stuff. a complete obsession with doom death heaviness, although, as I said on the initial review, this is a slow death metal record. It's not a death doom record. It's a fine distinction, but it's important here. If this is actually the final record by the band, I don't see how you could improve upon this. Within the boundaries of this style, I don't think it can be executed better. It is unbelievably heavy. It's very brutal. It's surprisingly catchy. It's physical music that you can dance to, and it also still gestures towards greater things, and the occult atmosphere really comes out. This is primitive ritual music in the way that Ride for Revenge is, but there's also surprisingly agile melodic phrasing across it as well. It does everything I want from this style of music in a single record, just flat out.
Yeah, I don't know. Anything else to add? It's it has the kind of rigor. Sluggathor is the aesthetic is that it's retarded, right? However, it has the same kind of ascetic rigor that's in the Aparthiva Raktadhara record.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it is also, because they're building from basic parts, the fundamental architecture, it's really generative. It might be Sluggathor's last record, and it might be impossible to top it in this specific narrow niche, but people playing death metal and people trying to make extreme barbarian music of all kinds should be listening to it.
Yeah. It's
and also slug.
Oh man, please, Sluggathor, come to Brazil. I will fly you out here to play a set at my shitty local bar, and I'll attempt to commit a homicide in the pit for you.
All right. And with that, we are rolling on to number one. I pretty much knew my number one record for the year in February or whenever this came out. This is Sternatus with Blazebirth Hall.
Yep. You said at the moment we finished the review, you were like, well, yeah, that's the best record of the year.
Yeah. This record absolutely blew my mind in a way that very few, in the way that classic records blow your mind. This is, basically, for those who might not know, Sternatus was a sort of, I guess you could say a little brother band of the Blazebirth Hall. Sort of not part of the Blazebirth circle per se, but associated. The initial demo had Blazebirth guys in it. It was named by Olv, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So it sort of had their blessing. And it disappeared forever. And we assumed, okay, this is just another weird footnote in the very long weird footnotes of BBH. He came back this year with a full lineup. None of the other, original Blazebirth members, but just the main songwriter with a fleshed out lineup, and produced this record. And it is as Death Metal Guy said at the beginning of the year, it's a tall order to call your record Blazebirth Hall, right? I think the important thing about this is that he's not just trying to coast on that legacy, he's adding to it. Mm-hmm. And thematically, he's not just saying, this is Blazebirth Hall, he's saying this is the saga of the Blazebirth Hall. Yeah. He's got a ship burning, being carried up into Valhalla on the cover, right? This is I think it's a tribute to the dudes who inspired him very much. He's singing this is his skaldic song of their tale. And that's how this record comes off. He's a phenomenal vocalist. And this is very strange music. I almost feel like for a lot of the detail, I should just refer you to the review. These are, on the one hand, fully fleshed out songs, in many ways, and at the same time, they have this elemental weirdness of the most bizarre and characteristic aspects of Blazebirth Hall. Certain riffs just don't really sound like, they're not shaped in the way black metal riffs are supposed to be, but they just do the work anyway. The riff to the Possessed Son of Dawn, or to the first track, Blazebirth Hall. There's something odd about them in a way, like they're more primitive than other black metal riffs. They're not beholden to the idea of the thrash based and death metal based or even troped classical or folk ideas of how these riffs have to sound. They're being made from the ground up. So this is very monolithic music and also very developed. He has a ballad track, which should flop, right? That should, oh my God, we're going to do the Blazebirth Hall sort of Russian wedding singer ballad. Like, no, that's not going to work. Well, he nails it to Sacred Wrath, the Worldly Glory. It's in some ways the most impressive track on the record. And the thing is, in addition to his screams and bellows, he's a powerful singer, and he takes that kind of shamanic warbling that Ulven Kaldrad sort of experimented with and turns it into full-throated song, kind of what they were reaching towards. It's a masterful performance. And throughout, on the imprecation, I mentioned it has this thoroughgoing musicianship in the best sense of the word, where everything is maxed out. Every part is meaningfully shaped, and there's, at no point do they let up. Everything is meant in it. This has that same quality. The timbre on this record is remarkable. It has this vast sonic space and a really organic guitar tone that nevertheless has some buzzing, abrasive power. All of the sort of misty, wandering, kind of atmospheric side of Blazebirth is gone. This is the basic compositional principles applied to forthright, direct, and consummately masculine music. Is ramming with Maelstrom of Will.
It's a great record. And probably the highest compliment that I can give it is that it's not referential, it's a continuance of Blazebirth Hall. It is part of it, Insofar as Blazebirth Hall can live in any way, it lives on this record. It didn't make mine just because I'm considering it amongst Blazebirth Hall records, sure. And I just love so many of those. I think that maybe with more time and more listens, because I've kept listening to this one, mm-hmm. I think it'll slip in alongside the traditional canon. Mm-hmm. But it's like it is a record that is a statement. It is a record that represents everything we respect in black metal. It is another perfect record. It sets out to accomplish something that is so niche, yet so familiar to so many, yet so deeply personal to him. It puts it at a really interesting emotional wavelength, I would say. It's sort of, when you listen to a record like this, and if you're somebody who, like both of us, really has a long history with listening to the Blazebirth Hall bands, it provokes a lot of thought in you. As important as those bands are, you're listening to a guy come back so many years later trying to sort of resurrect what it meant as art. It's one of those things that it's such an austere, cold record in so many ways, but it provokes a lot of very interesting sort of introspective feelings. What's it like to revisit these ideas so much later, and what's it like to hear a person who was there for it, but a little bit distant from it at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating record. I'm very happy that it's on your list, and I think it's going to stand the test of time for just about everybody.
The one last thing I'd say is this is true religious music.
Oh yeah.
This is paganism.
Yeah, this is like the
This is the pagan black metal record.
In a sense, it's one of them. I would say,
Yeah.
Because then you start getting into weird, and you're drawing the parallel between the sort of like ancestral reverence, that is paralleled both, between Blazebirth Hall and paganism as a whole. It's there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's on the same. I don't know. It would be up there with like Thousand Swords or something.
I can definitely see that. So number one for me, if you guys have been keeping track to what's up next for me, stuff that the Black Metal guys already covered, you already know what this is. But this is a record that snuck up. As soon as I heard it, I knew it was probably going to be like top 5. And then it just kept creeping up. And my number one every year is the one that I listen to like 30 times. And in this case, it is Galicia with Precipice. Me and the Black Metal guy have had some conversations about, we keep refining our understanding of extreme metal as we do this show, and we've just been doing it for such a long time that we're starting to kind of come to a conclusion. Well, I'll say it for myself. I won't put words in your mouth, that maybe this style, the Axis of Advanced style, is, as a niche genre, possibly the apex of extreme metal. In terms of being able to execute on the promise of essentially every style of extreme metal simultaneously. As the Black Metal guy said, you could tell us this was like a weird demo from between Sacramentary Abolishment and Axis of Advance, and we'd believe you. And it's not just that, it's that it's a worthy contemporary to those classic albums, I would say. There are things that are different, and in the ways that it's different, there are things that I really like. One of the slight hang-ups for you is probably kind of the spazzy tech quality of that. For me, that's an asset. Sure. This feels like Axis of Advance's Strike filtered through a prism of like Cryptopsy's Whisper Supremacy. Galicia is a band that in like half an hour does every single thing I want in extreme metal. There's brutally chaotic technical parts. There's huge soaring epic melodies. There's like plaintive kind of sentimental emotive stuff. And there's just hilariously brutal pit riff stuff and massive physical energy behind everything here. I know what you mean about the production. I love it. I love the dry, clattering quality of it. And it reminds me of when I was younger, listening to like raw tape black metal that was sort of like fumbling around and gesturing with these epic ideas that were just out of their reach in terms of production or in terms of musicianship. This has that quality, that sort of like amateurish quality, except they're actually executing it every single moment. It's fascinating. It's like at first listen, it almost sounds sloppy, and then you realize, oh wait, no, this is perfectly, everything is perfectly in time and perfectly executed. It's just that fucking fast and weird and unapproachable. Really, it's just, it does everything. This is probably the most multifaceted record I've had as a number one on this show so far. It's living in a world that's beyond black and death metal. It's living in its own realm alongside that style of sort of Axis of Advanced war metal. This is just a part of it. We're not even talking about a successor. It's part of the pantheon. It's there with Into Oblivion. It's there with all those few bands out there that are trying to carry that torch. And
in that sense, it sits well alongside the Sternatus. Right?
Yeah. It's carrying a style forward, one that was like nearly dead and forgotten. I guess what I would say is this style of music, it's not a matter of there being good and bad versions of this style. If you're able to execute this style, it is good music. Full stop.
Yeah, and so we've made that claim about certain other things, and then it has not been borne out. But like,
In this case, I think it's true. Like, if you don't make a good one of these records, it's not one of them. Like, being good is it's analytic. It's an analytic property of noble Canadian war metal. It's a this is yeah. I don't know if there's anything. I guess I can speak. We could speak at the end to what you were saying about this being sort of the apex of extreme metal. I guess, yeah, if I had to, in isolation, pick a single style that summed up all the strengths of the genre, and that even though it disappeared by like 2000 and by the early 2000s, sums up everything, still sums up everything extreme metal has done, it would be this style. And in terms of thinking about paths beyond the trap that is becoming, that the modern black metal scene is becoming, I think the Edmonton scene is really should be one of the cornerstone reference points. So yeah, I mean, scene, I'm very happy you put Galicia at number 1, and you know, you're doing here what I did with the Into Oblivion EP a few years back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they clearly are very. The fact that these two records can exist and be completely different, yet so closely following on the same legacy, proves that this sound has a ton of generative potential.
Oh yeah, I think the possibilities are limitless with stuff like this, and I'm so glad to see that there's more bands reaching for it. And in terms of this record itself, I don't know if it'll blow up in the way it should, just because it is too weird and unapproachable and raw and like confusing at first listen. But I have no doubt that like 20 years from now, this will be considered the way like Migaus's Open Season is. Like it is a like rare gem that very serious people espouse loudly, you know, to everybody else. Like this is one of those cases where it's the birth of a classic, and I can only imagine, like with a lot of other bands, I would worry, would you ever be able to top this? There's something about this style and the way they execute it that points to it only growing from here.